Okay.
Okay, so now it's recording. So
Awesome.
Voice
Awesome.
and screen sharing are on the recording, and I think you're good to go.
Great. Thank you very much.
Just call if anything goes wrong.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Hers though.
Yep, I've got that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. All right. Yay. Oh, Mary Kay. Hi.
How are you guys?
Hi. Welcome back, Mary Kay.
Thank you. Thanks for
Oh.
soldiering on in my absence.
Yeah. Sending positive thoughts. I hope
Yeah.
things are better with your mom.
Thank you.
Mm.
Can you guys hear okay?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay.
You can pull it closer to your head.
Okay. Oh, this is the
Yeah.
speaker? Okay. Oh, great. Okay. I don't want to do that.
Okay, and just the reminder, same as we did yesterday, we are recording. That we'll be recording this afternoon's time together, just like we did yesterday. So again, if that's something that folks may not be comfortable with or feel like it's not something they want to be a part of, it's really okay. It's okay to say, I think I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna sit this one out, and you're more than welcome to listen to the recording to kind of get caught up. Other than that, you're going to be recorded, and as we know here in Kobe, recordings get held on to forever.
Yes. Oh, hi, Matt. I didn't realize that was you. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Okay. And are you Cintily?
Yeah.
Hi, Cintily. Nice to meet you.
Oh, yeah. We can kind of see you.
Kind of
Yeah,
see.
we see you.
Okay,
You're
I
right.
like it that way. I like it. I'll just say hi, and then I'm going to
I know. I know. So I'm going to try something today because we won't use as many of the PowerPoints. And I know, like yesterday's presentation, the material that we cover, Mary Kay, you know this, when we're going over the PSRs, it's this kind of, it's a little heavy. It's like you just got to kind of walk through all the do's and don'ts and the rules and the regulations. And there's a lot of PowerPoints, a lot of words. So today will be a lot lighter on the PowerPoint end of things.
Okay.
Our goal for today, Mary Kay, just to catch you up, yesterday we walked through, definitely the do's and don'ts of the PSRs, what the scales are about. We talked a lot about the 6 versus 3-point scales, and showed some of the 6-point scales that are designed specifically for, or designed for particular disorders. We also looked at areas in which protocol decisions get to be made, ways in which the life can be modified for protocol decisions, and using Kobe protocol as examples for that. So we looked at, the Kobe protocol for when it's okay to onset a disorder, when you can start coding on a PSR line for which disorders. We looked at protocol for alcohol, for the substance and alcohol use as well. So we looked at suicidal ideation line. So we kind of had some time to look at the protocol specific piece using Kobe as the prime examples of those. So we talked some about, at the end, we were able to cover a bit with the psychosocial functioning, and also a little bit with the med grid, with the medication grid as well. So today what we want to do is to be able to really look at the interview itself and sort of the gathering of the information that we talked a lot about yesterday. How do we actually gather that info from participants? So what I need people to have in front of them today is that life booklet, you have the A-Life booklet in front of you. And that's the other thing, Mary Kay, just so you know, the recording will really be looking at the life and the A-Life kind of together. Because,
Okay, yeah.
So we look at the similarities, so it really can be training that you can use for both.
Okay.
So you'll have that. So that was that was a little, the challenge of the training of like, I'm just going to do it all in one, just all in one. But we were just talking here also that one of the things that once this recording is made, what I'd like to do is to sort of put together an electronic packet of materials. So that, whether it's the Life or the A-Life booklet, PSR scales, the vignettes, all of those kind of pieces, so that if somebody truly is going to use this recording as a straight out first introduction, They're new on staff. This is what they're going to sit and do, that they'll have the materials in front of them that they need to be able to do it. And so I think we can do that, put this together electronically. And I think that'll be just great for the department to kind of have, and for you guys to have access to.
Yes, it would. Thank you.
Yeah, that's, because I say that now, we'll see how long it takes me to actually do that. It's a good idea, though. We're all in agreement. It's on the recording now that I said I would do that. Okay, so before we start, does anybody have any questions about anything that we talked about yesterday in terms of PSRs or the psychosocial section? Anything come up as you were thinking about it, thinking, yeah, I have no idea what she was talking about? All good?
No, we're good.
Okay, all right. Well, today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the interview itself. And so that, again, that process of actually gathering the information that we need. There are kind of two phrases that you want to stay aware of when you're using the life. You're going to hear the phrase reporting interval, and you're going to hear the phrase PSR interval. And the PSR interval is determined by the study protocol. And that is the ideal period of time from one interview to the next. That is the length of your PSR grid. So if you're covering a 3-month follow-up, if the study says every 3 months we're going to talk to our participants, your grid covers 13 weeks. If you're doing a 6-month follow-up, study says every 6 months we're going to talk with folks, your grid goes for 26 weeks, and so on. That is your PSR interval from the start of your grid to the end of your grid, those dates. Your reporting interval is real life. So if you are saying we do 6-month follow-ups and your participant comes in, has an interview done, and then they come in 8 months later, your reporting interval is 8 months long. You're going to talk to them from the date of the last assessment to the date of the current assessment. So your reporting interval may overlap onto another PSR grid. But your reporting interval is the period of time that you're discussing in the assessment. So it may be shorter than the PSR interval, it may be longer. Ideally, it won't be shorter. We try not to cut them shorter than that. But it absolutely, as we all know, can be much longer. So those two terms, just as we're talking, you may hear those come up today, and that's what we're talking about, is those are the differences between those two terms. The other thing to keep in mind when you're getting ready to start to use either the life or the A-life, you want to kind of get your head in the game. If you are coming from a study that you're used to doing baseline assessments, you want to get your head into the game that you're now coming in to do a follow-up. And that requires something a little different from you. It requires you to know that there are 3 components that are going to kind of guide this assessment. The diagnostic criteria, your time, the time period that you're covering, and your PSR scale that you're using. And that's why we always talk about the scales first, because that language, that understanding of, oh, I'm going to be assessing hypomania, and there's a 6-point scale for that. So that means you have this sense of how the concept of this disorder is broken down for this study, and that you want to know about persistence of elation or irritability. You want to know about how many symptoms are present during this period of time. It helps to guide the types of questions that you're going to be asking. Because as we said yesterday, this is a semi-structured assessment. So you don't have every question in front of you. This is not the SCID. This is not the case ads. You don't have a set of questions that you're going to be reading verbatim. You're going to be using these 3 concepts to guide your questions and to allow the participant to begin to describe what their experience has been like in relation to particular symptoms through an identified period of time. And as the assessor, it is your role to monitor time. that fully sits with you. Your participant is coming into this study to talk about how they know they're coming in to talk about how they've been feeling. You're going to want to know about their mood. You're going to want to know about any other psychopathology. But you're the one who's very aware of what time period you're covering. And so you really are the one that holds responsibility for that in terms of guiding the process, kind of having some parameters set up, some guidelines set up so that the participant is able to kind of move through time, but they're not able to be jumping back and forth, and they're not able to go too far back in time. If you're assessing the past 6 months, you don't want to know what happened 2 years ago. You already have that documented. Even if this is your first follow-up, that was covered in your baseline. You have to kind of keep it contained. There are some things that you want to do. When I say you want to kind of get your head in the game, for this type of interview, there are things that you do to prepare for the interview. Again, it's not a baseline. A baseline, some of the things that I really enjoy about doing baselines is that you kind of go in cold. It's like, okay, you're starting fresh with this participant. You have no history. Maybe a screening form that was done on the phone, who knows? But this is different. If you've got the A life in front of you or the life in front of you, there has already been an assessment done. And so you're going to use the information. You have to prepare yourself and kind of bring yourself up to speed to what was going on at the time of the last assessment so that you can move forward in this assessment. So one of the things you want to know is your timeline. What was the date of the last assessment? Who did they see? Maybe it was you, maybe it was somebody else, but who was it? And you want to keep that information in front of you so that you'll know if that last assessment was, if the last assessment was at the end of August and you're going to cover from the end of August till today. You want to keep that information in the front of your mind. You want to write it down. For me personally, I write the date of the last assessment. As we talk about how you're going to prep this manual, I keep that date in front of me on every page that I know they had symptoms last time. I put the date. I just don't trust myself anymore. I just don't. So think, I'll remember. I won't. And so rather than flipping pages back, I always keep it right in front of me where I can look down and I can see, at the end of August. So my conversation always starts there. In terms of preparation, I'm going to take some time to look at what were the disorders that they were followed for at the time of the last assessment. What was on that last grid? Now with COBE, you guys have narratives. You have a place that you can look. You have your information in one place. So you want to know as the follow-up interviewer, where is the information? What were the level of symptoms that were present at the time of the last assessment for every single disorder? So when you have this booklet, this is with you to prep. We talked a little bit, I kind of made reference to this a little bit last week. This booklet has a lot of white space. There's a lot of blank paper. It's funny because when you meet somebody who's sitting down to learn the SCID for the first time and they open it up and they're like, wait a minute, wait a minute, way too many boxes, lines, I don't even know what I'm looking at. But people who do the SCIDs and they open this for the first time, there's a little freak out period. There's the like, where are my questions? It's that moment of like, are you kidding me? Like, this is what I've got? Yeah, this is what you've got. So you're going to make this work for you. So you got to know the symptoms. And what this is designed so that when you open up the booklet, on the left-hand side is DSM diagnostic criteria from disorder to disorder. The left-hand side is diagnostic criteria. The right-hand side gives you a probe question at the top, a guide. Your probe question is just a guide. It's a way of introducing the next topic that you're ready to talk to them about. It is not meant to be verbatim. And there's a lot of white space, and that's where you're going to take your notes. But this is also what you use to prep. Take the information from the last assessment. So if I'm under major depression, and I know they have a history of major depression, I'm going to make a note of date of the last interview and what symptoms were current, if any, at the time of the last assessment. And I make myself a little note of sort of how long it was like that. You know, it's like, this is what it was like at the time of the last assessment. But like, for instance, I'm sitting here with this booklet in front of me and I've prepped it for the role play. Okay. And in the role play, what we said was that the participant, you know, you have this, we'll have this information in front of you. The participant had a history of major depressive episodes, no symptoms at the time of the last follow-up. So I have a note on that page. I have the date of the last assessment. It says no symptoms. I have a note to myself. Their first episode was at the age of 12. So I'll remember this is something they've had since, you know, those early teen years. And I may have, if I've got a narrative, I may have made a note to say, oh, it was like that. Actually, this was the end of August. It was like that all summer. For sure, they were symptom-free for the summer, because that helps me to start my conversation with them. And I do that on each page that I know they have an open line on the grid. If they have something on that PSR grid, I'm going to turn to that page and prep that page in my booklet. I decide where I write it. Myself, I have a habit of writing across the top of a page. I just take a few quick notes. Sometimes people will write along the edge, from somewhere where you will write it in a way that you won't mix it up with your notes from the current interview, that somehow it visibly looks different to you. So whether you use a pencil or a red pen or just something that you know you're not going to have in your hand when you're taking notes for this interview, and you won't mix them together. It just is there for you, so you make it work for you so that when you glance down, you see what you need to see. What you don't want to be doing is having to ruffle pages, pull out a whole narrative, and find your place. You know, you just want to be contained. So prepping the manual is really the key piece. And you do that, like I said before, you do it on each of your pages where you know there were symptoms or a history of symptoms prior. So again, that's always in front of you. And for me, I put the date of the last interview on each one of those pages because that's just me. I think I didn't do that, or in years past, I didn't have to do that. I do that now. I definitely do that now. You know, same in the psychosocial section. I'm going to make some notes to myself. If they've had a follow-up done previously and they had the psychosocial section coded, I'm going to put some notes to myself in there of just where they may have been at in functioning in those different sections, because it gives me something to reference in the conversation. Just kind of gives me a little bit of a heads up. The other thing to know, in terms of prep, if you are going to be assessing for treatment, medication, same concept, whatever forms you have in front of you, get a look at what were they taking last time. If there was an active medication last time, you want to know about it because you want to know, has it, if they continued to take it, has the dose changed at all? If it did, when and how? Just like we talked about yesterday, if they're like, oh, no, I don't take that anymore. When did you stop? How did you stop? Was it over a period of time? Was it all of a sudden? Was it just, I just don't. I just don't. Any of those, but you want to have an idea of what you're starting from, because it's not their responsibility to recall. You have accurate information. Whatever you have recorded from the last, their symptoms, their treatment at the time of the last interview, at that time, that was current. That was the most accurate information you had out of the last assessment. That was their current report. So you want to start with that in your conversation. And as we talk a little bit about the interview, we can talk about ways in which sometimes that might get challenged in the interview. And we'll look at that in a minute. But in terms of prepping, all of that information you just want to have access to in a way that you can look down and see it. that you're not having to shuffle through things to find it. So does that make sense to everybody? All of this, or do you guys, the idea is to look organized, yeah. Look like you know what you're talking about. It's all we can ask. Does anybody have any ideas or any suggestions from things that you found helpful, or when you're prepping, or things that have you found that weren't so helpful?
I mean, we always just review the narrative before, so I'll read through it. Sometimes I'll highlight it, like on the computer, especially like major things that have happened. So I remember, like, okay, I can just quickly see it right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, you know, it's funny because for me in an in-person interview, I've struggled with the narrative because I just can't seem to get myself to look quick enough. But on a phone interview, the nice thing is you get to have whatever you want out, you know, so that you have the, you really have access to everything then, versus when they're sitting with you, you don't want something that would be a distraction, nor something where you're going to end up with a, what's that? I want to see it kind of conversation, where it's like, really, we don't want to go there right now.
Like I tend to keep the narrative out mainly when I'm assessing for changes in relationships, just because in the A-Life PSF relationship section, there just isn't a lot of space.
Yeah.
I kind of always, I mean, I'll make a note of like what relationships were coded, but I don't necessarily like prep, like add information about like the relationships from the past assessment, I guess, like the quality or whatever.
Yep.
So I'll keep the narrative out for that generally. But
Yeah.
not for a lot of other things.
So really you get a place where it's comfortable for you. It
Yeah.
works for you. And that's really the key. That's really the key. People who are beginning in assessing, and you guys have been doing this for a long time, but you got to think back to when you were, you know, brand new in the field, just getting this thing started. Part of the prep process may have been highlighting certain parts of the diagnostic criteria, things that you may find that you forget to ask, or that seems like it's kind of buried in the criteria, and so your eyes, as you're looking to the left side of the page, it's not catching your attention. So new assessors, new to the field, new to the diagnoses, you know, you can mark up the pages, run a highlighter, make a note. You know, I know there've been RAs as they're starting would write a note to themselves across the top, get change points, just to remind themselves of, you know, what is it that you're here to do. So this booklet can really work for you because it gives you some room to do those kind of things, to take some notes for yourself, so that you have what you need when you get started. Before we, you know, when we are looking at, let me see, let me just do something here. Let's see. I'm thinking about bringing this. Yeah, I want to, I'm just kind of, I'm bringing you up to the slides. I think I'm still going to go without the PowerPoint. I want to talk about the concept of time in the assessments. As I said before, it's your responsibility to monitor your time frame. And you want to start, you know the date of the last interview, and you want to start your conversation there. You start at that date and come forward in time. And this has been something that I know over the years there's been discussion about, and where sometimes raters might feel like, you know what, I want to talk about now and go backwards. And, you know, I get it. And I'm not saying that that's like, you can never, ever do that, because there are some participants where it's like, all right, this may be, let me at least get what's current. Let me at least get something here. If they really are a very poor reporter. But the reality is that's very hard to do consistently and in every interview, to go backwards in time. That really you want people to move, you know, you anchor them to what was going on at the time of the last interview. You know the date, You know who they met with. On each diagnostic, and the page for each disorder, you get to remind them the types of symptoms that seem to be going on at the time. You know, I always use phrasing that leaves it a little open. You're not looking to be absolute confrontational. This is what you said, so, you know, it seems like these were the things that were happening, so we want to talk about how it's been since then. The point of doing that is to help anchor them in time, and then you walk them forward. And you control the pace at which you're moving forward so that you feel like they have time to think about it. And as, you know, most of us, as we're thinking about time, we moving kind of in chronological order, moving through time is the easiest way for us to recall events. And they're going to, you know, we're going with their best memory, with their best recollection. What we know is that for adults, we're doing in, you know, once people are in adulthood, and adults are in studies, the life has been validated for annual follow-ups, 1-year follow-ups, and that adults recall can really do that. And they're going to recall what stands out to them the most. You, as I said, you sort of control that time conversation, and you want to minimize their jumping back and forth. Now, there may have been, you may be wanting to start this conversation at the end of August, and they're coming in to talk to you, and something happened in October that they are dying to tell you, because they know you're going to want to hear it, and wait till I tell you what just happened. Wait till I tell you what happened in October. So you, as the assessor, get to decide to say, we're going to get there. Before we talk about October, let's just talk about the end of August, September, beginning of October, till we get there. If they can't wait, you certainly can go ahead and say, let's talk, okay, what happened? When and what? And start your conversation there. But I'm going to tell you, one of the things that I always do when that happens, I'm going to write myself a big old note on that page of end of August to October, or remember to go back or something, because I still have to cover and talk about that period of time from the end of October till whenever this event started. So, you know, time, you have a responsibility to be able to fill in this whole PSR grid. So you have to have conversation about that whole period of time. And so minimize the jumping back and forth. You just want to minimize it. And listen, you actually are listening for how they're describing, how they're talking about this. Because sometimes you're in a conversation and you think you're talking about this past October. And then you realize they're talking about the October before. And you're like, huh. And it may be very subtle in terms of even the tense of the verb that they start to use, or something sounding familiar from that past narrative where you're like, wait a minute, wait a minute. Was this October of 17? Or was this the October before? Ask your clarifying questions. Because if it was the October before and say, no, oh, that's, you know, okay. So I remember we had talked about that, because I know you had talked with, you had talked with Matt about that last time. But let's look at just this past October. Bring them back. But you hold responsibility for that. You know, this is your job, is to kind of control this time period. And this is what makes this assessment very different from other assessment tools that you're using. This is a key component to it. And so understanding time is really essential. And so the more clear you are going into this, the better off the participant is going to be. Each time you're assessing for a disorder, you're starting back at that start period of time again. You know, each time you turn the page, you start at, you know, whatever the beginning of your reporting interval is, and move it forward. Sometimes your participants might get really irritated saying, you know, you asked me that question already. You have to let them know, we did, but we were talking about really, we were just talking about September. Now we're in October. And I'm just wondering if this is something that was happening then as well, to try to help to engage them in the concept of time. But it really is it's an absolute key piece to allow this information to flow in a way that you're going to be able to take these symptoms to see what symptoms cluster together during what period of time in this reporting interval. You have to have that clear in the assessment, clear in your notes, so that after the interview, you can take your information and transfer it onto that PSR grid. And if you don't have your symptoms clear in a time period, you will not be able to code your grid. And it happens. It's easy. You may find yourself getting lost in time in the conversation, that your participants really, they're struggling with time, and you're finding yourself struggling with, wait a minute, where are we? It's say it. Kind of stop a minute, saying, you know what, I think I'm losing track of where we are, and back up to the last point in your notes to when you guys were talking about the same thing. Back it up and start at that point again. Your participants want you to get it right, so that's the kind of thing, those kind of confusions, just put on yourself and saying, I think I'm losing track. And get to where you are clear of what symptoms are clustering together and during what time period they're happening. Because again, without it, if you get back to your desk after the interview and you don't have that, you're stuck. You cannot code that grid. So you might as well put the time in, put the time into the assessment and get it right so that you can get your coding done. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. It is. It really is one of the pieces that separates this from other assessments. And sometimes this time period, when we do these examples, I always use 6 months. Role plays are 6 months. It's all nice and clean. Well, sometimes you've lost track of participants in our longitudinal studies, and you're covering 2 years, covering 3 years. Covering 4 years.
Hopefully you won't lose someone for 4 years.
It's, so you're going to get the bigger change points. The farther back in time you have to go, you get the big stuff. You lose that, you lose that fine movement in terms of their recall. But they'll remember the big pieces. But I'll tell you, it changes your responsibility. Now you're talking about October, but now you're talking about October of 2015, 16, and there's 17 too. So, you want to prep yourself on how you want to go about having this conversation, and help to keep them engaged in that process. Let them know what it is we're trying to do. I've had participants set a challenge of like, I don't get why we're repeating this all the time. I'll say, actually, especially people that are new to a longitudinal study. It's like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this information and I'm going to kind of put it on a timeline when we're done. So I want to make sure I have, what you're explaining, I want to make sure I have it in the right order as well. So I want to keep them engaged in this process.
I don't know what you guys do, but one thing that we often do here before we even start the A-Life is we kind of call it like our housekeeping type section. And as part of that, we always ask about, can you give me an overview of like big life events that have happened in your life, like either positive or negative, that have impacted you in some way. So just to kind of start getting a sense of like change points, maybe get into that way, you can kind of like have that in mind before you even start the assessment. So kind of like if like they had a birthday or they had a breakup or something, you have an idea of how to kind of like structure the assessment. So, do you remember we were talking about like this breakup that happened earlier? Do you remember how your mood was at that time or something?
Right.
But I don't know if it's going to be different or.
Yep, it gives you some idea, some preparation to what some major change points, some events were, and then you can see were there change points before, after, is there any relationship, but when you have agreed upon conversation of when events may have happened. You certainly know your holidays, things like that. Also know, you guys know when you're interviewing, whether it's children or adolescents, We're talking about school. Well, what grade were they in? You know, because what we know about our kids, right? If something, you know, I might be talking to somebody in October and they're telling me about this past May, but for them, that was last year. Well, because I was a sophomore then, I'm a junior now, so that was last year, is the phrasing. You know, I know it from my own kids. I remember sitting in the doctor's office, you know, and the doctor wants to know how long my daughter's knee's been bothering her. And she's like, well, it started last year. And the doctor looks at me and I'm thinking, okay, whoa. Not last year, last soccer season, which was the fall. You know, it's like, it is now November. She's playing indoor, so now the knee is still bothering her. I have not held out for a year. But you know, it's like, you know who you're talking to, right? You understand when you've got kids or adolescents that time has a whole different meaning. And in longitudinal research, you guys have seen it with COVID. You've watched your participants grow up, you know, and the struggles that you had with them early on, or in terms of their concept of time. And now you're talking to a 22-year-old and their concept of time is better, we're hoping. You know, you have literally been a part of their growing up. And their reporting style. And that is the benefit, I think, of longitudinal research, when you have consistency of your interviewers and you actually have that relationship and have that some understanding of how they present and their how they choose to share their words, you know, their experiences, how they choose to describe them, is always really helpful. But time, for sure, be aware of who you're going in to talk to. Be aware of, again, when it's child adolescent, what grade were they in last time and what grade are they in now? How old were they last time? How old are they now? Was there a birthday in there? You know, with adults, we want to know, you know, job changes, relationship changes, those kind of things are very helpful to kind of lay out. You know, maybe there are change points around those events, maybe there's not, but at least we have an agreed upon time to say we agree when those certain things happened, or when they were off on vacation, or any of those kind of things. When did the school year end? When did it start? You have these agreed upon dates that are helpful. Each time you move through a particular diagnosis, each time you move through a disorder, right, you've walked through this time period and you've heard about a lot of these events, and that becomes information that's helpful when you're probing. You learned about it under the depression section. Now these are events you're aware of when you're probing for hypomania, when you're probing for social phobia, when you know, you begin to have an understanding of what life was like for them in this identified time period, as well as the symptoms from one disorder help to, like when those happened in time, those become markers in time as well as you move forward in the conversation. So it's, you know, what you guys know is that you're carrying this, you're sort of building this picture, this shared understanding of what their experience has been for the past 6 months, and you carry it forward as you move through this interview. It's like when we were talking about the psychosocial section, when you get there, you know a lot. You've carried all of this information forward, so that you have something that's of use to you, and helpful to keep the conversation going. The other thing too, I always try to remind people, you can bring a calendar. If you're doing a face-to-face interview, you can have a calendar in the room. You know, bring one so that in case a visual is helpful for the participant. That there's nothing wrong with that. When we talk about the life booklet that you have, I want to talk a little bit about how you take notes, because how you kind of take your notes, hold your information from this discussion so that you can turn around and score it. Again, over time, you sort of get a system down for yourselves. But at the beginning, you know, it's a little like, okay, how am I supposed to do this? You want to have some idea of ways to organize that. And one of the things that I want to say as we start to look at this this booklet, you know, if you have that booklet open and you've got the major depressive episode page, you're on page 4 and 5, you've got your diagnostic criteria, and you have this probe question on page 5. On the right-hand side of the page, right, is this probe question that's different for each disorder. It's meant to introduce the topic. But if you notice, the probe questions are written in a way as if you're moving them to full criteria. You're starting the conversation, trying to get up to that full criteria point, because the probe questions are written as if they don't have a history. So for somebody who's never had an episode of major depression ever, and your protocol is, I can't onset this thing. If you're in a study that the protocol's like, I can't onset this thing unless they hit a new episode, then we want to start the conversation of, have you ever experienced a down mood where it's with you most of the day, nearly every day for at least 2 weeks straight? Like, you're similar to that SCID kind of question. But this is longitudinal research. This is why we've prepped this page. We have participants that may have a history of this disorder. And so if this is somebody who has experienced a depressed mood in the past, has experienced major depression in the past, at the time of the last assessment, no symptoms, we're going to go in and we're not going to use this question verbatim. We're going to start our question with, you know, last time you were in, you know, we were talking, it was right at the end of August, just before Labor Day. And at that point, we had been talking about your down mood, but at the summer, you had really shared that you hadn't experienced any down mood in the summer. So by the time we got to the end of August, you had noted it seemed like there wasn't any down mood around, and, you know, you were sleeping fine, your appetite was good. And it actually had been a few months since you had experienced any depressive symptoms. Does that sound about right? You know, because now we want to start our conversation with, so what I want to do is talk to you about how it's been since then. So when we last spoke, there didn't seem to be any down mood around. When did this mood come back? Was there any time that you began to notice your mood felt kind of low or depressed since the end of August? When's the first time? And if they're like, oh yeah, it definitely came back. When is the first time you began to notice some of that down mood? So now this is how I'm starting. I'm not using this question that's on the page. I need to start where they're at. And that's why I keep saying these questions are not meant to be read verbatim. They're sort of there to allow you to know, okay, I got to introduce the topic. If somebody has had symptoms of this particular disorder in the past, I start my conversation with that. If they had symptoms at the time of the last assessment, I'm going to say, so let's take some time to talk about your down mood. When you were here last, right at the end of August, it seemed like there was a down mood that was around just a couple of days a week. It seemed like maybe 2-3 days a week. There was sort of this low mood that was with you, that was bothering your appetite and your sleep. It was kind of bothersome to you, but it didn't seem to be getting in the way of anything at that time. So what I want to do is talk to you about how it's been since then, if there was any time that it changed, whether it got better, got worse. But let's kind of walk through since October and talk about what that mood has been like. There's my intro. I want them anchored to end of August, and we're going to talk about depressive symptoms. And now I'm going to say, so, right after you were here, just still at the end of August, how often do you think that down mood was with you? I want a fresh report. I'm going to start them right there. How many days a week? How much of the day? And I start from the top of my symptom list and I go down. But those questions, again, those probe questions on the page are meant to be a guide. They're meant to cue you that you're starting a conversation about you're moving on to the next disorder, and it cues them as well. So again, that's why having the prep, having material in front of you of what was going on at the time of the last assessment when you turn that page, because you need to incorporate that into your conversation right at the start. So you want it right in front of you. Somewhere where you'll see it, somewhere where you know what you wrote, however you want to abbreviate however you want this to be, wherever you want it to be on the page. You know what you're talking about, and you're not going to mix that information in with current information. Those notes, when you go back to look at them, oh, I don't know how long after the fact when you go to write your narrative. Not that there's a lot of time that goes by, but let's just say perhaps a booklet gets tucked aside and some time goes by before it's coded or before a narrative's written, and you open it back up, you can clearly see what are your notes from the current assessment. Just like that.
On a related note, while we were talking, I just made up an example here of how I prep. So we actually usually have a colored piece of paper on it, and our notes are usually for reference: date of birth, date of intake, date of last follow-up, date of current follow-up, all of the current diagnoses, participant ID, rater ID. As Cynthia mentioned, any significant life events, positive or negative. So there was a death in the family, or there was a graduation, or there was something. Those are going to be your future anchor points probably. I also write notes for treatment. So during the previous interval, for example, therapist once a week, med management once a month, meds, Prozac 60 milligrams a day. I write an order of assessments because we have a lot of information. So there's some internal contact information, housekeeping, but then we go in between the A-Life and the KSATs. We also have the traumatic events form, the SIDP. Depending upon what else you may be doing, could be cardia forms, WASI-CANTAB, blood draws, and then following up on the SR. So I write that so I don't forget any portion of that. And then any notes on the interview. So sometimes for participants, they need a taxi voucher to get there. We need to arrange babysitting, get the money order set, schedule next follow-up. So just stuff that I don't forget. And then when I prep, so I made an example for depression. So previous assessment, I just made it up. So February 27, 2017 to August 27, 2017, and an example of symptoms. I write them and then I draw a line so I know where the change point is. I just made a change point for December 31st, and then the final date of the assessment, February 27th. So I just made an example here, and I just made a corresponding example on the PSF for student work. And it's not the same as a scan, but I just took a picture with my iPhone, and I'm going to email it to you guys. Hopefully you can see it from that. And if not, I'm going to scan it properly in the office later. But this is just an example of what we do to prep and how we make sure we have our notes in front of us. We know what we're looking at. We know what we want to ask. And the information from last time is very clearly separated from the information from this time.
Mm-hmm.
So, anywho.
Does that work?
Yes, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
All right. I'm going to pull up the screen because I want to talk a little bit about that note-taking piece. And again, I'm very aware that I have quite a few people in this training who have been taking their notes for a very long time. So have their systems down.
Have made up shorthands and everything.
Yeah, this has my shorthand on it, and I know what it is, and I will go back to my notes years later, and I know exactly what I was talking about.
And that's really what matters, is that whatever your note-taking system is, you get it. I mean, nobody's going to be editing notes. Nobody's going to be, hopefully having to look back at notes to try to figure things out. And I know Kobe, I don't know if the WAVE study or other studies there use narratives, but, what we know is that, yes, narratives take a while. It's time consuming to write them. However, in longitudinal research, man, you gotta have some kind of document. You don't want to be going back to people's notes to try to say, well, if we want to see the participants that had a PSR5, like what did they look like? Or, the things that you have to dig back for that, 5 years, 10 years down the line in a study, there's, a new investigator on the study, their area of research is something different than the initial focus, and they're looking to pull out some details for a paper. They don't want to be going back to your notes. So having the narratives is huge. Having the narrative to go back to when you've lost track of someone and now you want to, you're stepping in, you're covering the last 3 or 4 years. You want to kind of have, first time you're meeting them, you want to have some idea of the life of the study here in one place where you can look. So, The narrative?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so I had an idea. I thought it might be helpful just to put this all together to send you guys a de-identified narrative. So I'll take out, ID, date of birth, things like that, but you'll be able to see how we note the PSR and the PSF. I do know from previously that, at least in the past, Pittsburgh for Kobe utilized more of a case ads versus a life template for the narrative, and that's fine. Whatever you guys do is fine. I just wanted to show you a de-identified example of what we're talking about here so that later on when you go back and forth and you're looking at the recording and you're like, well, what's that in the narrative? You'll know what we're talking about. So I'm going to send that to you guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
With the electronic packet to come.
Yes, and part of the electronic packet to come.
Yeah. The more we repeat that in the recording, the more I'm realizing that it's like, oh, I'm really going to have to do that now.
Yeah, exactly. Locked in.
That's it. I'm locked in. It'll be like, didn't they say in that recording there was going to be an electronic pocket? There will be. There will be. Okay. So in terms of note taking, again, I know you guys have your system, but for the purpose of this recording, part of what I want to sort of allow people to take a look at for the purpose of the recording. I'm going to pull the screen up. I'm going to pull the PowerPoint screen up. So hopefully I do this and nobody goes away permanently here. I don't really cut anybody off. Did I? No, almost. I'm almost there. One more.
By the way, Shirley texted me. She's not
share
calling
screen.
in, so that won't affect this.
Oh, yay. Okay.
There you go.
All right. Look at that. Look at that. A little technology. All right. So some of this we've been talking about already. And what we know is that the point of taking these notes is so you want them in a style that works for you, but in a style that you're able to see your symptom cluster and a start and stop date for each symptom cluster so that you can take it and transfer it onto your PSR grid after the interview. And so this is sort of an example of what I mean by that. As Heather was just saying, she has an example of sort of the style in which she uses that she'll run her past symptoms down the side of the page. Like in this slide, it talks about, okay, note taking, what we know is we're covering from May 7th to November 6th. So the first block of notes that I'm going to have from myself, I'm going to write May 7th on my page. And then what I do is I run a list of, as I go down through the diagnostic criteria with the participant, I'm asking about depressed mood, I'm asking about loss of interest, I'm asking about appetite, I'm asking about sleep, I go all the way down, top to bottom, every symptom. So anything that they're saying yes to, I'm making a note of it. So here we've got a depressed mood most of the day, 3 days a week, loss of interest most of the day, 3 days a week.
Duration for both?
I do. I have frequency and duration for both because I ask them. So how often? I've got low appetite, I've got low energy, and I've got mild social impairment. So what I know is that at the beginning of May, around the 7th of May, around the time of the last interview, these were the symptoms that were the participant was experiencing. This is what they report to me. I want to then say to them, how long did it last? How long did it stay like this, where it's with you most of the day, 3 days a week, bothering your interest, your appetite, your energy? How long did it stay at that level? Was there a time that you noticed it changing, is another way of asking, whether it got better or it got worse. When did you notice it change? And so if they say to me, that the first time they noticed anything change is the end of June. So before I begin my conversation about the end of June in my notes, I put my end date here. So I've got, now my notes look like May 7th to the end of June, and here's my symptom list. And then I'm going into end of June. And, they note an improvement at the end of June. I go through the symptom list. All symptoms are denied. There's nothing left as far as they know. Everything is done. Was there any time that you noticed it changing again? Where you noticed any symptoms were back, and since the end of June? So we go through the summer months. Anything in there that you noticed change? Nope, I think it's been like that until now. So even as we come into the fall through September, heading into October, you know, as the weather's getting colder, anything changed? Nope, nope, all good. Into the beginning of November, through Halloween, into early November, no, nothing. Okay, so now my notes say end of June to now, I've got all symptoms denied. So I want to have a start and a stop date above my symptom cluster. That's how I want my notes to read. I'm going to click on this and hopefully that'll be okay. Yay, you're back. Okay. I'm a little nervous on my clicking on and off. I'm doing more clicking today, which is why yesterday the slides were just kind of left up because I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to touch to get it to go away. I forgot to ask that question. But so does this match with sort of where you guys are at? Those of you that have been doing this forever, does this sort of match your experience with note-taking?
Yeah, similar to how, yeah. Basically how things were last time. So, and if it was no symptoms, you know, moving forward, okay. But yeah, noting like when it started, when things changed, what the symptoms were.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so that you can see in your notes, your dates and your cluster, like somehow those link so that when you go back, so you've done however many interviews between then and the time you get to go back and actually code this thing up, you can kind of cleanly see, you know, what you're grabbing to then transfer into your PSR score and onto the page. You know, what we know is that as you've been doing these over time, the PSR score has become very ingrained in your mind. So, you know, you're really incorporating those in your line of questioning. Sometimes brand new raters, I've seen them keep, like they'll put like a little sticky on the page or something that has the PSR scale for whatever page they know there were symptoms last time. So they'll have a sense of where they're judging their questions. But the more you do these, the more it's kind of in your head of when you're thinking, oh, do I want to give this a 4 or a 3? And so what's your next question? What do you want to know? If this is going to be a 4, what's missing? What do you got to ask about to make it, to see if that's there or not? And then you'll know, yep, I'm going to code this a 4. A lot of that is just done in your head, once you're familiar. But again, when we talked about prepping the packet, that's one of the things I had forgotten to mention is that absolutely, I've seen people bring the scales in just so you have it as a reference early on as you get more familiar with what you want to be talking about with folks. Do you guys have any questions at this point? Everybody good? All right, I just want to kind of go through a couple of quick kind of, couple of rules of thumb, I guess. And then Cynthia and I are going to do a role play. So, and there's a couple of things that we kind of came up in conversation yesterday. You know how sometimes when you're talking with participants and, the symptoms have ended and, they're like, I don't know, I just know the past, I've been fine the past month. I know, there hasn't been anything the past month. And so we know the past month being, okay, so February was good. And these were, they were full criteria in December. How did this kind of go away? And they're like, I don't know, it just did. They're not very good reporters. They're not sure how to describe this. So you get to ask questions like, did it seem like all of a sudden it just was done? Or did it feel like it kind of faded away over time? Remember to kind of ask some questions that will give you some idea of how to code this as accurately as we can. You know, if the participant just recalls sort of a fade of symptoms, you know, they know it was still really bad by the new year, it was still definitely really bad, and then things just kind of faded away, and they know they haven't had any symptoms in February. So we've got this fade over a month period of time. That in a narrative, you can say that, you know, that best to their recollection, it was a fading of symptoms. Symptoms just sort of, you know, gradually improved. And then on your PSR scale, you can show that gradual improvement. It's like, all right, I got 4 weeks. I'm going to go, you know, I'm going to represent PSR 4, PSR 3s, and PSR 2s. I'm going to do maybe 1 4, 2 3s, and a 2, something like that. So I just, what I see is a fading away. I see a gradual improvement in these symptoms. And in my narrative, I've said that's how it was reported. So things like that, when people don't remember when, like something changed in May, they don't remember exactly when, you know, we always follow with the questions, do you think it was towards the beginning, middle, late in the month? You know, to give you an idea of where you're going to put this change point on the grid. Can you get it within maybe a 2-week window in there? They're like, I don't know, I just know it changed in May. We default to what week did the 15th fall into? You know, it just helps to get some reliability, but you know you're sort of in that midway through the month. You can drop your change point in there. When they're struggling with time, you walk them through time slowly. You know, you kind of guide that, you know, if they're struggling, say, all right, so we're coming into the month of September. At that point, you were heading back to classes. Anything in there? Do you remember any changes there? Coming through into October, got a couple long weekends. Anything change? You know, those kind of things, so that you're feeling like as you're sitting across from them, they're thinking about it. That's your goal, that they're giving it some thought. And we want to go with their best recall. That's it. That's what we have. So as long as you're feeling like, okay, they're giving them some thought and you've slowed down the movement through time, it can be pretty helpful. Sometimes people get frustrated with their own lack of recall, and so we just try to reassure them that it's like, you know what, we're going to go with your best memory. It's okay. You know, it's not like there's some right or wrong answer. We're going with your best memory. You know, if you're needing them to estimate something, better it be their estimate than yours. You know, so those are the kind of things that, again, are just kind of supportive ways of keeping people connected through the process. And like we mentioned before, certainly whenever there's confusion on time periods, and we talked about this when we talked about the psychosocial section, that sometimes something comes up there that you realize, oh, this event was in June, it wasn't in May. And when we originally talked about this event, it came up in our conversation about depression. And everything got coded as of May. So you get that chance to kind of clarify, and you just put, you know, as you guys all know, you just put it on yourself of like, oh, wait a minute. I think I'm not sure I got it right when we were talking about your mood. I think I might have was thinking we were talking about May. Do you think it was May or June? It gives them another chance to kind of talk about it. But sometimes as you move through this assessment, change points, you know, as they're thinking about this, the past 6 months, the more they're thinking about it, the more accurate it becomes. And so sometimes you might have to go back and make an adjustment for information from early on. But you, again, if that comes up, you want to be doing it during the interview and not when you're stuck with your notes and you're like, I have this event here in May, and 5 pages down, I've noted the same event as happening in June, because then you got to do a callback and get clarification. So you know which is the most accurate. But those are just kind of, again, some of the kind of the rules of thumb that come up, you know, during the process. Okay, anybody have any questions or anything? All righty. All right, so we are at about 10 after 2. We're going to do a role play. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of talk about it, about what people may have wanted to do with coding. for the role play. Again, it's not something, we were talking about it earlier here, it's not something that I have a coded grid for because we're going to do it live. So, you know, that it's like, we'll see where the change points are. We'll see where things kind of come up as the conversation's going. But we can kind of talk it through. I know you have to take off early. So do you want to, you don't have to stay for the role play if you want to just not be crunched for time. It's really okay.
Heard a bit of it anyway.
I did. I heard the practice role play. You
That's
guys
right.
are
We
in
did a
for
practice
show.
run in Matt's office, so he's already heard some of the gory details. All right. You guys should have in your packets, you should have a, like a role play prep sheet that gives some of the history for this particular participant. I know it's in here somewhere. I forget what I called it.
It's called Role Play 2.27.17.
That's it. So it's just like a one sheet, kind of a 3/4 sheet. Do you have one?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's the information that, as the assessor, this is what you know about this person going into this particular role play. And that's the information that I took and used to prep in my A life, because I did that ahead of time. Had to remind myself to do that ahead of time. Yeah. Okay, so probably what would be helpful is if you've got your pockets, if you've got your A-Life pockets, just use them to take notes, or if you want to take notes on paper, that's up to you.
Bye, Matt. Nice to see you.
Bye. Nice to see you too.
Bye.
Bye, Matt.
See you later.
I'm gonna remove my parka. That would not be
Okay,
read for a character to pay for my parka.
that's right. We're gonna let Cynthia have time to update her parking meter remotely, so this does not become a costly training for her.
Do you guys want another one? So you can take notes?
Okay.
City of Providence making its
Yep.
money off of the
Yep,
tickets.
there.
They're everywhere. All right. So now you have time.
Okay.
You've paid for your
I
parking.
have.
All right, you guys ready?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, let's do this. Okay, let's see if I can remember how to do the process. All right, so, okay, so Cynthia, thanks for coming in. Thanks for coming in today. The last time you were here, actually, last time you and I spoke, it was at the end of the summer. It was right at the end of August, just
yeah.
before Labor Day weekend,
right,
you had
yeah.
come in. So what I want to do for today's time together is I really want to just talk about how things have been for you since then. So
Okay.
from the end of August until today, okay? So when you were here last time, we were talking a little bit about your mood, and it seemed like the summer months, things were going pretty well. Like,
Yeah, they were fine.
yep. So at that time, you had shared that, you know, you weren't experiencing any depressed mood or any problems with your appetite, sleep, the kind of things that kind of get thrown off
Yeah.
that you've experienced in the past.
Yep.
So I just want to kind of get a sense of how that's been for you since the end of August. So if you think back to, again, just around Labor Day, was there a time that you noticed that down mood was back, that you began to notice symptoms of feeling kind of down or
Around Labor
depressed?
Day or since Labor Day?
And if there was time since then.
Oh, yeah. I noticed my mood starting to, the first time I remember it like feeling down or it being like notable to me that I was down was kind of like the week of Thanksgiving.
Okay.
So like that, I guess late November is my best guess, is the first time that I remember knowing that I was down.
Okay. So at the end of August and when you, we got started after Labor Day into September,
Yeah.
coming into the fall months, any down mood at all in that period of time?
No. It was like Thanksgiving. Like that's
Okay.
what's most notable to me.
Okay,
is
so
the-
even October stayed good,
Yeah,
no,
it
no
was
down
fine.
mood,
It was
anytime
fine.
you had that loss of interest or
No.
anything? Okay, coming into like early November, still
Yeah,
any down mood?
I don't remember.
Okay, so the first thing that you noticed was, and you said the week of Thanksgiving?
I
or-
want to say it was like that period. Like
Okay.
Thanksgiving, because I remember like so I generally really enjoy Thanksgiving, like
Yeah.
turkey and the stuffing, and I had family like coming from out of town, and I remember like just not being into that, which is really unusual for me. And like
Sure.
my family kind of noticed that I wasn't like, I barely had any like dinner. I didn't really have leftovers, so that's why I said that was kind of like the first time I remember.
Yep.
Feeling down.
Yep, where it really stood out to
Yeah.
you. And did it seem like it started in that week, like right at that time?
I think so. That's the best.
Okay.
I mean, it's been a couple of months, but that's my best guess.
Okay, so looking at that, figuring we're in that week of Thanksgiving, which
Yeah.
is like right around like the third week in November, it tends to be starting to run late in the month.
Yeah.
How often was that down mood around? How many days out of the week did you notice that down mood?
It was most of the week. I don't think it was like every day. I'm thinking like a work week. So
Sure,
like I guess 4 to 5 days. I
Okay.
guess.
sure.
I think maybe the weekends it wasn't around 4.
Mm-hmm.
So like 4 to 5 days is like my best guess.
Yep, so you noticed it more during the work week.
Yeah.
And on those days that depressed mood, that down mood was with you, how much of the day did you
I
notice
think
it?
it was most of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in that week of Thanksgiving, when you were noticing this down mood, did you notice yourself losing interest or pleasure in
Yeah.
things? I know you said definitely not enjoying the holiday. Were there other
Yeah.
things?
I was I'm pretty busy and my friends are also pretty busy, but we keep in touch pretty regularly. But I wasn't like really responding to texts very much. My friends like know what my patterns are like, and they like invited me out that week, and I remember like making up an excuse to not hang out with them. And I know we'll probably talk about this later on, but like I worry a lot about my friends and like my relationships with them, and like so they kind of know, but they once again like they kind of know how I am, and so when they reached out and they were like, let's hang out, I was just like really not into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, sort of like I asked with the down mood, when you noticed yourself not interested in things that usually you enjoyed doing, how many days of the week did you notice that?
I guess when I was feeling down or feeling low.
So sort of thinking about that work week time, 4 or 5 days a week.
Yeah, just not really motivated, kind of blah.
How much of the day?
It was like most of that time. Okay. So most of that work week, I would say.
And did you notice any change in your appetite? Whether your appetite was higher or lower?
It was lower because I mean I mentioned the turkey and stuffing. I just like wasn't like I didn't really like it, which is unusual for me because that's like one of my favorite holidays. And it's, but yeah, I just wasn't super hungry.
Mm-hmm. And how many days a week did you notice that?
I mean, like when I was down, blah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you notice that you were having any trouble sleeping, any trouble falling asleep or staying asleep?
No more than what's usual for me. And I know we talked about this before, but like generally it takes me like about 15 to 20 minutes, but that's just how I am all the time, even when I'm like feeling like myself.
Okay, so that didn't change at all.
No more than usual.
How about the opposite? Any time in that week where you were sleeping more than usual for you? Okay. And in that time, did you notice yourself talking or moving more slowly than what would be usual for you?
Not at that point, no.
How about the opposite? Really very fidgety, restless, very hard to sit still?
No.
Okay. And what was your energy like during that week?
I did feel tired.
Mhm.
I felt tired.
How many days a week did you notice that?
The work week, I guess, the 4 or 5 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in that week of Thanksgiving, did you notice yourself find yourself feeling guilty about things, either things that you've done or not done?
No,
Yeah. And how were you feeling about yourself?
fine, no differences.
Were you having any trouble thinking or concentrating during that week?
No,
Okay. And anytime during that week where you found yourself thinking about death or that you'd be better off dead?
no.
And so it was definitely noticeable by that week that of Thanksgiving, and that down mood and that loss of interest was around 4, maybe 5 days a
Yeah.
week. But when it was there, it was with you most of the day
Yeah.
and was bothering your appetite and your energy level.
Yeah.
Did those things, were those things getting in the way of doing what you wanted to do or needed to do?
Well, I guess the most notable thing for me was like not really wanting to hang out with my friends, since that again is like something I generally like worry a lot about. Is that I was spending a lot of time like in my room, so I was still going to work and stuff, but like when I was home, I was like in my PJs watching like Netflix, but not really hanging out with my family. So it was mainly like in my friendships that I think I would, because I was like kind of avoiding my friends a little bit.
Okay. And was it bothering you that you were feeling this way?
Well, like we talked about before, like this is my pattern. Like I know in the fall, winter, like my mood is gonna start to. So it annoys me. I mean, it doesn't make me angry.
Yeah.
But it was irritating. It was beginning to irritate me that that's kind of how I am.
And how long did it stay like that? So if it started around the week of Thanksgiving, was there a point at which you noticed it changing again? Either it got better or worse?
I want to say it was after the holidays, so like after the New Year.
Okay,
I think it was like that through the New Year.
So it stays like this 4 or 5 days most of the day, like you're really noticing it more in the weekdays?
Yeah.
Through December into the December holidays?
Early Jan, yeah.
To early January?
I was pretty sure it was kind of like that through the beginning of January.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so it changed in the beginning of January, and how did it change? What changed?
It got worse.
Okay.
Once again, as you know, it's like this is just
Sure.
how my pattern is. It starts to kind of go down and it just kind of goes down
Now, so how often was that down mood around at the beginning of January?
all the time.
When you say all the time, do you mean every day?
Yeah,
Okay. And how much of the day?
most of the day, I think.
Okay. And how about that loss of interest or pleasure in things? Was that
Yeah,
still there?
Most of the time. Kind of still avoiding my friends. I really didn't want to go to the gym very much. Gosh. And even with work too. So like, I'm a mechanic, and I really like my job. Like it's, and I actually like called into work a couple of times in that period. Like not in the same week. I think I called in like 3 times when my mood got down. But that's really out of the ordinary for me. So I let them call into work just to not, like I just wasn't, like I just wasn't feeling up to it.
Okay. And you had said this feeling was around most of the time. So,
Yeah, it was most of the time.
okay. Yeah. And so what's most of the time for you? Like how many days out of the week do you think?
I think it was every day
Okay.
for most of the day.
Okay. And so by early January, were you noticing any change in your appetite? Was your appetite low, or were you eating
Yeah, my
more?
appetite is still low,
Mhm.
and I think I lost some weight. I don't know exactly how much. Like my clothes was a little looser.
Yep.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I wasn't super hungry.
Any change in sleeping where you were having trouble falling or staying
No.
asleep?
No more
That
than
didn't change.
usual.
How about the opposite, sleeping more than what's
No.
usual?
No.
And during that time, did you find yourself talking or moving more slowly than what would be usual for you?
I actually like. I feel like I was moving a little bit slower.
Did anybody say anything to you about it or notice?
My mom noticed it. Like my mom knows me really well. She like knows what my patterns are like, and so she like noticed that I like was moving kind of slowly. I was talking kind of slowly. I did feel like slower.
And how many days out of the week did you notice that feeling?
I think that was like most of the time, like nearly. I just can't remember like that not being around. I guess is the
Okay.
best way I could describe it.
Okay. How about the opposite? Anytime you noticed yourself very fidgety or restless, it was
No.
hard to sit still. And how was your energy by early January?
It was really,
Okay.
it was really low.
And
When I wasn't at work, I was in bed.
how many days out of the week did you
I think it
notice
was
that?
like most of the time.
And how were you feeling about yourself during this time?
Fine. I didn't notice any differences in that.
Anytime you noticed yourself feeling guilty about things that you've done or not done? Any trouble thinking or concentrating during this time?
I would actually gonna say, yeah, like, you know, I remember like, it was kind of funny is, but I was like having to rewatch like TV shows I was watching on Netflix because it just seems like the information just wasn't going into my head, if that makes any sense. And at work, they even, my boss, and not my boss, my bosses, they kind of know about my history, and they even kind of like mentioned that I seemed a little like unfocused at work.
Okay. And during this time, by early January, were you experiencing any thoughts of death where you found yourself feeling like you'd be better off dead?
No, thankfully.
And you had said that, you mentioned that during this time you found yourself kind of pulling back from friends, and that you were called out of work. There were 3 different occasions that you had called out of work since the beginning of January. Any other ways that you noticed it getting in the way?
Well, so I live at home, and, you know, I work a full-time job, and, you know, so I'm really busy with that. But, like, you know, I'm living with my family, so and I have, I guess, chores like every person does, and I generally just share responsibilities with my family. But, like my mom was having to prompt me to, like, make my bed, do my laundry. I don't think I did laundry, like, 1 week or something. So it's like my family was having to prompt me a little bit more to kind of, like, take care of stuff for myself at home, which is not, I mean, I'm 20, like, they don't have to do that anymore for me, or as much as when I was younger, but they were having to sort of do that during that time.
And was it bothering you that you were experiencing
Yes,
this
like,
mood?
it was really, even though, like, I know, I mean, I've been kind of dealing with this for a long time. I mean, it was really, really, like, upsetting me that, you know, I'm on meds, I'm, like, taking care of, doing what I'm supposed to do, but I'm still kind of experiencing this.
And how long did it stay like this, where it was with you most of the time, almost daily?
It was like that month, I guess.
All of January?
The month of January, I remember just being kind of gray, kind of being blah. Yeah.
When did you notice it changing?
It was like late January, early February. I noticed my mood kind of started just to get better.
Okay. So in early February, you noticed your mood?
Yeah, like, I don't remember, like, if in early February I was still feeling depressed. I mean, maybe there was still something there, but I remember not being like I was in January.
Okay.
So if anything, I guess I would say that it started to get progressively better. Like,
Sure.
It improved, but I don't know exactly. It just was, I wasn't depressed all the time anymore.
Okay. So if we look at how you're feeling now, is there any down mood or depressed mood with you now?
No, actually, the past 2 weeks, I'll say, the past 2 weeks, I haven't been feeling low at all. My motivation is kind of back to usual. So the past 2 weeks have been fine.
Okay.
So I was able to connect.
Sure.
I know we were meant to kind of meet earlier this month, but so the past 2 weeks have been, like, fine.
Okay. So let's look at the past 2 weeks. Any depressed mood at all in the past 2 weeks?
No.
How about that feeling of loss of interest, not enjoying things?
No.
Has that been around in the past 2 weeks? How's your appetite been in the past 2 weeks?
Usual. Yeah.
Okay.
Usual.
And again, any changes in your sleeping in the past 2 weeks?
No.
Problem
A
sleeping?
lot more than usual. No.
And that feeling of talking or moving more slowly?
No.
Any fidgety or restless feelings in the past 2 weeks?
No.
Any time in the past 2 weeks that you were kind of feeling down on yourself or feeling guilty about things?
No.
Any difficulty concentrating or
No.
focusing in the past 2
No.
weeks? Any thoughts of death in the past 2 weeks?
No.
Okay. And so if we look at, so that things began to change at the beginning of February, you know, for sure these past 2 weeks there, you know, it's been feeling much better.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be anything around. And you had mentioned that it just kind of seemed to go away. in those, so like that
Grad-
first half of that
gradually, yeah.
September,
And
in
it started
February.
to get better.
Okay. Okay. Okay, great. All right, good. That sounds good. Well, before we move on, I do want to ask you also, because I know I had asked you a couple different times about any time you experienced any thoughts of death, or thoughts that you may be better off dead. Was there
Yeah.
any time in the past 6 months, so since the end of the summer, where you noticed where you tried to injure yourself in any way?
No,
Okay, because there's sometimes, and so was there any time in the past 6 months where you made any attempts to kill yourself?
no.
Okay.
I haven't thought about anything like wanting to die or it's been a long time.
Okay. Okay. And you know, when I ask about some of that time of where you did anything to try to injure yourself or
Sure.
cause pain
Yeah.
for yourself,
Yeah,
it can happen sometimes without feeling like you wanted to die.
yeah.
Did that happen at all in the past 6 months?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I've never hurt myself or anything like that.
Okay. Then let's talk a little bit about, again, looking at the past 6 months since the end of August, let's talk a little bit about that kind of high mood that you've had sometimes.
I have them to tell you about too.
You do. I know. Well, when we talked at the end of August, there wasn't any.
I know.
It had actually been quite a while since the last time
Yeah.
you had that feeling of that.
That's the difference. I'll be able to tell you a little bit. I've had.
Okay.
I've had a few.
So when's the first time you noticed yourself having that high mood?
Gosh, it was before Halloween. I don't think it was immediately before, but it was like maybe like the second week of October.
Mhm.
So it was before Halloween. I mean, so it was like,
Okay.
let's say middle of October.
About mid-month?
Yeah.
So again, from Labor Day through September, any of that high elevated mood?
Nope.
Beginning of October, anything in there? So we're about mid-October is the first time you noticed that it was happening.
Yeah.
Okay. And was it that that period of time where it's like you have that kind of high, better than good mood, better
I
than
was
usual
really
good mood?
upbeat for a
Yep.
weekend.
Okay. So when you say a weekend, how many days?
I mean, 2 days.
Okay.
2 days.
Yeah. And during those 2 days,
Yeah.
did you have that feeling like you could do anything, like feeling really good about yourself and like you
Yeah, I
could
just
do
felt really,
anything?
like, I felt really positive about stuff.
Mhm.
But I mean, I know myself well enough to know that it was like not like a normal level of positive. Like I actually felt like
Mhm.
really upbeat, and no one said anything, but like I noticed
Sure.
that I was feeling more chipper,
Mhm.
pretty chipper.
And again, did you feel like you could accomplish anything?
I wouldn't say that I noticed a difference in that. No.
Okay. And during those 2 days, how were you sleeping?
No differences in my sleep then.
Okay. So how many hours were you sleeping each night, do you think, during that time?
I think what's usual for me now is getting about like 7 to 8, and I was kind of still getting that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And during those 2 days, did you find yourself more talkative than usual, or?
Yes. Yeah, I was. I was talking a lot at people.
Okay.
I was very, very. I was pretty talkative, I would say.
Okay. And was that with you those 2 days
Yeah.
that stayed with you? And did you notice your you were jumping from one thing to another in your
No,
mind, like kind of going
everything
from
was
one idea
connected.
to another?
Yeah, everything was connected.
Okay. Did you feel like your thoughts were racing?
No.
And did you find yourself distracted easily by things going on around you?
I remember doing a lot, but I don't know if I would say I was distracted.
Mhm.
And no one said anything. I was distracted.
So when you say you were doing a lot, what kind of things were you doing?
Oh gosh. I worked I was scheduled to work that weekend.
Okay.
So I was supposed to work I think 4 hours both Saturday and Sunday, but I volunteered to work more. So I actually ended up working 12 hours.
Okay.
So I was very at work, and I was kind of just moving from thing to thing. I had unfinished stuff at work that I was able to finish, but I was kind of I was very productive at work. I noticed, but no one said anything to me. But I noticed that I was yeah, I want to go to work and I want to really do a great job.
Mhm.
And then when I was at home, I I remember like doing a lot of folding.
Mhm.
Really, I would say I was active at home too. So busy,
Mhm.
like kind of pointless busy is the way that I would describe it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you find, were you able to kind of complete your tasks that you were working on? Or, because I know you mentioned with work saying you had to kind of go back.
I finished most stuff, but there were definitely things that I like needed to go back
Okay.
and finish.
Okay. And during those 2 days, did you find yourself getting involved in activities that maybe weren't going to have the best consequences for you? Because sometimes people might find themselves like shopping a lot or
No.
spending a lot of
I
money.
worry a lot about money, so I didn't do that.
Okay. Okay. And you had felt like you noticed the change.
I noticed that like no one said anything.
Okay.
No one said anything.
Okay. And that lasted for 2 days.
Yes.
And was there a time that you noticed that mood coming back again?
Weirdly enough, but not so weird because it's me. So I know we kind of talked about like the week of Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So I would say that maybe the week before that, I was in that mood again. But it was
So
around
it's
more often.
In November, and we're back into November. So it was,
Yeah.
you had a couple of days in the middle of October.
Yeah.
Seems like it kind of goes away. For
Yeah.
late October, we get back into November,
Mhm.
and you notice it coming back.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, and it was sometime before Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And when it came back, was it still that really high or hyper kind of mood?
Yeah, and it was around more often.
Okay.
I want to say it was around like most of the week. I mean, once again, like I don't know if it lasted every day that week, but it lasted like most of that week.
Okay.
And people noticed it. My family noticed it. My bosses noticed it. Didn't get into trouble, but I mean, they definitely like noticed that difference in me.
And during that week, so it's there most of the days, and did you notice yourself having that, like feeling really good about yourself, that feeling like you could get anything done?
I just felt like I was like, I just felt really good about myself. Like I felt like, yeah, I'm like really awesome. But it wasn't like I felt like I was better than everyone else, but I felt like, yeah, compared to what's usual, like I felt like, yeah, I'm really good at, whatever I do. I felt really positive about myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like my abilities as a mechanic and stuff like that.
Okay. And during that week, did you notice any changes in your sleep?
Yeah. And I really do try to keep an eye on my sleep because my doctors told me that I need to do that. I think I was getting like between like 2 to 4 hours,
Mm-hmm.
I think,
Okay.
during that time.
And how would you feel the next day?
I felt fine.
Yeah.
And that's why I know that this was like a weird mood for me, because I felt fine, which is out of the ordinary. Like if I was only getting like 4 hours in general, I would feel really tired, but I didn't feel tired.
Okay. And during those days, did you notice yourself, you felt like your thoughts were jumping from one thing to another?
Actually, no, thankfully that did not happen.
Mm-hmm. Any racing thoughts?
No, nothing like that. But I remember like I was talking a lot.
Okay, still
Once the talking at people.
Okay.
I laugh every time because I just remember like sometimes my mom would tell me to just like slow down because I was just like just like, chattering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you find yourself where you would feel distracted really easily?
No.
And did you find yourself getting involved in a lot, like different projects where you were trying to do a lot of different things?
Yes. Really busy at work. Really busy at home.
Doing what? Like, can you give me an example of what you were doing when you were saying you were busy?
That point was busy. Kind of going from, I just had a lot that I was going. I'm a mechanic, so I think I was like working on like 2 vehicles simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
I finished it because I had to, because it's my job. But like at home, it was maybe more prominent. Like I think I left a couple of things not quite finished.
Mm-hmm.
But like I rearranged furniture in the bedroom, I cleaned the basement,
Sure.
cleaned the kitchen,
Yep.
cleaned the bathroom. So yeah, which is different because I work full time, so I don't really have the time to do that. But I've certainly found the time to do that stuff during those few days.
And during those days, did you find yourself getting involved in activities that may not have had the best of consequences for you?
No, thankfully, no.
Okay. And so this is, you said you noticed it before Thanksgiving. And we had talked about that down mood coming Thanksgiving week. Do you feel like, was there any time in between
It kind
those
of felt
two,
like
or?
it kind of in a weird way kind of felt like a light switch. I feel like so it was like, if I want to think about I think I said this was like a work week. So if for those couple of like those 5 or so days when I was like this, and then the weekend was like the break, and then by the Monday, the down mood started. But
Okay.
like we talked about before, that's my pattern.
Okay.
That happens a lot.
And,
That's happened before.
and you had said other people noticed this change.
Yes.
Okay.
My family noticed it. My bosses noticed it. I didn't get into trouble, and they also know. Like my coworkers don't know, but my bosses do. My doctor told me that I should call my bosses, and my bosses know about that.
Okay.
So they knew that something was different about me.
Okay. And you said not anything that got you into trouble.
I didn't get into trouble, no.
And were you able to kind of keep up with work?
Yeah.
Because I know you said you were doing multiple projects at
Yeah.
the same time. Were they going okay? Were you able to
I think so.
do them well?
I would say so. Yeah, and I only say that because I didn't get into trouble. Like no one said that I don't feel like I was doing a bad job.
Okay. Okay. All right. And so this then went into the down mood. It was followed by that down mood around Thanksgiving. Has there been any time since then, since November, that you noticed this high kind of mood, this high or hyper kind of a
No.
mood?
No.
Any time that you noticed your mood much irritable than usual for you?
No, and that would actually be something that would be really obvious. Like we talked about before, like that used to be something I had a lot when I was younger. Like, but that no. There are no times when I was like, everyone was kind of getting to me, like even like strangers, like nothing like that happened.
Okay, so there were 2 different times since the end of August. It was that around the middle of October, and then just before Thanksgiving, just before the down mood. Okay. All right, thanks. Now, as we're talking about either the down mood or that higher than usual mood, when you were experiencing either of those moods, has there been any time since the end of August where you noticed yourself in those moods and you could either hear things others couldn't hear, see things others couldn't see?
No. And like we talked about before, like I know other people that have bipolar disorder like I do, and they'll tell me about like seeing stuff and hearing stuff and thinking people are out to like hurt them. And I've never had anything like that. Never had to go to the hospital. It's never really caused a lot of problems. So, but yes, I guess the answer to your question, like no, I didn't experience that.
Has it ever happened when your mood's been okay, where you're not in a down mood or a really high mood? Okay. Now, since the end of August, has there been any time where you experienced any panic attacks, where suddenly you feel very frightened, a lot of physical symptoms that go along with it? Any time where you noticed yourself being afraid of going out of the house alone, or being in crowds, traveling on buses, trains? Is there anything in particular that you're afraid of? Heights, animals, insects, anything like that? And since the end of August, has there been any social situations that you've either avoided or endured with a lot of anxiety, that caused a lot of anxiety for you?
Oh, when we talked, when I've been sad, do you mean like when I'm sad and I'm avoiding my friends? Is that what you're talking about?
This would be a little bit different. This is where you find yourself feeling very uncomfortable, kind of either speaking in front of other people or eating, writing, things like that, where
those issues.
Yeah, this is really kind of about being when people's attention, when you're the focus of someone's attention.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one of the things we have talked about before, and you made note of here when we were talking earlier, is that worry that, that sometimes, that's something that I know you've shared in the past that you've had really since you were much younger, that you find yourself worrying about things. So when we talked at the end of August, that worry was definitely still there, that was there kind of more days than not, you found yourself worried about something. And at that point, it seemed like when you were worrying, you'd feel kind of on edge, maybe have some trouble with your sleep and get that irritable kind of feeling. Does that sound about right?
I don't remember being irritable. That doesn't stick out in my head because, like, I think I told you when I was younger that was more of an issue, but I don't remember any time since the end of the summer where I was just irritable or people were kind of getting on my nerves or anything like that.
Well, let's look at how it was then at the end of August. So right around Labor Day. Were you worrying about things then?
Yes.
Okay. What kind of things do you worry about? I know you mentioned friends.
Yeah, I mean, I still live at home, but, I worry about, money, because, like, I want to, like, move out, so, like, I worry about, like, my finances a lot. My living situation, so, like, getting along with my family. I worry about my job and, like, my, future kind of, like, my career goals and stuff like that. Those are, like, the main things that I worry a lot about.
And back at the end of August, how often did you find yourself worrying? Like, how many days out of a week would you notice it?
Most of the time, like a lot of the time, I
So
worry about stuff.
Okay. And when you're worrying, again, thinking about the end of August, when you would be worried about things, would you find yourself with like a kind of a restless feeling or feeling kind of keyed up or on edge?
On edge.
Okay.
I would feel on edge.
And at the end of August, when you were worrying, did you find yourself getting tired easily?
No.
Would you have any difficulty concentrating or having your mind go blank when you'd be worrying back at the end of August?
I don't think so.
And that irritable feeling, do you remember that at the end of August?
I don't remember the irritability.
Okay. When you were worried back then, at the end of the summer, when you were worrying, would your muscles get tense or ache?
No. That doesn't.
And was it bothering your sleep? Would you find yourself having trouble sleeping when you were worried?
Yeah, and that's what they said. Since I've been little, I've had that trouble. The trouble like with falling asleep. I would say it's because I'm like thinking about thinking about stuff that I sometimes don't want to think about or worry about.
And how long would it take you to fall asleep back at the end of August?
Well, like I think like 15 to 20 minutes. Okay. I mean, if I wasn't taking like the sleep med that was prescribed for me, it would certainly be longer than that.
Okay. But even with that, it's taking you about 15, 20 minutes. Okay. And at the end of August was when you'd be worried about things and feel kind of on edge and some trouble sleeping. Was it getting in the way, making it difficult for you to do what you wanted to or needed to?
I think sometimes it did cause like arguments with my family, my friends, because like I guess it bothers them that I worry. But I can't really control it. Like I wish, it's much better now than it used to be, but it's still something that I struggle with. Okay. And so it caused like it does cause arguments with them sometimes.
Okay. And does it bother you that it's happening? How much does it bother you?
A lot. I wish this kind of bothers me more than like feeling sad and being like upbeat isn't really an issue. But this kind of bothers me more than like the mood stuff. Because like the mood stuff, like I kind of know what the pattern is. And I know it kind of will get better. But this is just kind of like more true for me. Because I just worry about stuff and I don't always want to worry about that stuff. But it's just how it goes, I guess.
And this is how it was like at the end of August. Has there been any time since the end of August where you noticed it changing, where you found yourself either worrying more or less often? Or?
I think like when I, like after the new year, or when my mood started to go down, like I just feel like the intensity change. I think I was maybe worrying more about the friendships because I know I was avoiding my friends and, you know, not wanting them to, I mean, even though like they're great friends, they're like, you know, they kind of know what my patterns are too. I think I was maybe more worried about like losing my friendships. Although, you know, my friends aren't going to stop losing my friends because of this. So yeah, so I would say that I was worrying more about the friendships starting like around Thanksgiving, and that got worse after the holidays when my mood got worse.
Okay, so more as the mood worsened, you began to focus more on the friendships.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anything else changed that you noticed?
The other stuff didn't change. No.
Okay.
But then again, yeah, I worry a lot anyway, so it's kind of hard to qualify.
And how's it been since this past month as the mood's lifted?
It's kind of gone back to what's usual for me, which is still worrying a lot.
So in the past month, you've still been worrying more days?
Yeah. I still
Most of the
worry,
days? Yep. Okay. And when you're worried on edge, you feel kind of on edge, trouble sleeping? Okay. Okay. All right, great, thanks. Now, again, kind of looking back at that end of August period of time, since the end of August, has there been any time that you've been bothered by thoughts that don't make sense to you, but they're very repetitive, like they keep coming back to you again and again, even if you try not to have them?
No.
Okay, how about where you find yourself having to do things over and over again or in a very particular way?
Not in a particular way.
Okay. Since the end of August, has anything happened to you that would be extremely very stressful or traumatic for you or for anybody who may experience it?
No.
Because this can be anything. It can really be like a natural disaster, like, or it can be an assault, either a physical or a sexual assault. Okay. Okay. And since the end of August, have you had any trouble with restlessness, where you find yourself being kind of physically restless, hard to stay in your seat, hard to keep your mind on your work?
Is this kind of like when you were asking me earlier when I was like sad and stuff? Like, is that kind of what you mean?
This is a little different. This is, it's sort of something that may be there whether you're experiencing a down mood or not. Okay. Okay. And has there been any time since the last interview that you found yourself like involved in kind of in arguments that lead to like physical fights, or you're kind of staying out of work, you know, or getting involved in any criminal activity?
No.
Okay. Okay. You might have mentioned it already. Anytime we found that you find yourself losing your temper easily, or being kind of very resentful or kind of touchy. Okay. Has there been any time since the end of the summer that you weighed a lot less than what other people thought you should weigh? How about any time since then where you found yourself eating large amounts of food in very short periods of time? Since the last interview at the end of the summer, have you been using tobacco at all? Do you smoke or chew?
I do not.
Okay. And what has your alcohol intake been like since the end of August?
I'm a social drinker. I do drink a couple of times a week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so when you drink, like what do you drink?
I drink beer.
Okay, and so you had mentioned you'll drink a couple times a week.
Mm-hmm.
How many beers will you have when you drink, on average?
Like 5 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, but I never drink like by myself or anything like that. It's only when I go out, and I go out like with like my coworkers or something. Like we go out like maybe 2 or 3 times a week, I guess, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go out with my friends on the weekends sometimes. I think we go out like maybe every other weekend or something, and I'll drink the same amount. I don't really ever drink more than 6 beers.
Okay. Okay. And when you're out with coworkers, like how long do you guys stay out? Like,
I mean, I don't like maybe 2 or 3 hours, I guess.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how about when you're out with friends?
Oh gosh, maybe I don't know, like I guess we'll go out like around 7 and I'll usually be home by like, midnight or 1, but I'm not drinking that entire time.
Okay. And has this been consistent since the end of the summer?
My drinking, you mean? Or?
Yeah, like that's sort
Yeah,
of
that-
like
that's-
how
that's
often
pretty
and how much you would
typical.
drink.
That's pretty typical.
Okay. What I want to do, I just want to run through some questions to see if any of these have come up for you.
Yeah.
Since the end of the summer, when you would be drinking, do you find that that it interferes with your ability to either follow through with what you need to do at work or at home?
No.
Do you find yourself drinking in situations where it might be physically hazardous for you to drink? So that would include driving under the
Yeah,
influence.
there was one time, and it's the only time I've ever done this. It was after, it wasn't New Year's Eve. It was during that first week in January.
Mhm.
So usually I'll kind of Uber like afterwards, or like my friends would think about like getting home, but like that day I just couldn't get a ride. So I actually drove home one time when I was kind of buzzed.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I mean, I knew it was like stupid, and I haven't done that since then. There was just one time that I did that.
Okay, and that was in early January?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And has your alcohol use created any legal problems
No.
for you?
No.
That's a good thing.
Oh, God.
And has it caused any problems with like family or friends where people are objecting to your drinking?
No.
Okay. And do you find yourself, since the end of August, has there been time where you found yourself kind of needing to drink more to get the same effect?
Compared to
Compared to sort of when you first started to drink?
No. I don't drink that much. I don't drink often enough, I think, to experience that.
And do you find that you get less of an effect with the drinking the same amount?
I don't think so.
Okay. And on the days that you're not drinking, do you find that you kind of don't feel well physically, where you find yourself either, having days where you find your heart racing or you're sweating or getting the shakes, things like that?
Nothing like that.
Okay. And has it been any time since the end of August where you found yourself drinking more than what you were intending?
No.
Or drinking over a longer period of time than you intended? Any efforts times where you felt like you wanted to stop or cut down
No.
during that time?
My drinking started to cause those kinds of issues where I guess I would feel like I really need to stop or quit or something like that.
Okay, and any time since August where you find yourself giving up things, kind of not doing things that you used to like to do because you were spending time either out with friends,
No.
where you would out drinking or kind of cutting back on other activities?
No.
Okay. And since the end of August, has there been any time that the alcohol has caused any physical problems for you or made any physical problems worse? How about any time where you notice them either making your mood worse or your worry worse or anything like that?
No, and actually, I think during like the time when I was like depressed in January, I don't even remember if I had any alcohol that year. I mean, aside from that time I told you about where I just drove like an idiot after I'd had a couple of drinks. I don't really know if I even drank very much during that month.
Okay. All right. And since the last interview, since the end of August, has there been any time that you were using any street drugs, anything like marijuana or cocaine, anything?
God, no. I can't. Yeah. Like, just because of the meds I'm on, I just couldn't. I wouldn't chance that.
And any time that you were taking more than what was prescribed of your medication?
No.
How about with anything over the counter, taking more than what was recommended on the
No.
box?
I'm on a really good med regimen right now, so I think even if I was thinking about it, I'd check with my doctor because it's taken a really long time to kind of get to where I am, even though I had like the down moves and stuff, like that really is like a lot better than when I was younger. So I wouldn't want to chance that or risk it by taking something that could really have a bad reaction or interaction with the meds I'm taking.
Okay. Okay, great. What I want to do now is, again, we're still going to talk about that time period from the end of August till now, but I just want to kind of look at different areas of your life. Some of this we've talked a little bit about already, and ways in which either the down mood or that really high mood, as well as the worry, ways in which those things may have interfered in different parts of your life.
Sure.
Are you a student at all? Are you taking any classes?
No.
Okay. Is there any particular reason?
Well, I just, I'm trying to save money to, so I don't want to just like move into an apartment. I want to actually buy a house. So I'm trying to save money to get a down payment for a house. So I'm kind of like focusing on that.
Okay. Do you find that either your mood or that worry, either of those things influence your decision? Is that part of why you're not taking classes? No. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, because you've talked a lot about friendships.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to just ask you a little bit about how your friendships have been since the last interview, since the end of August. How many people do you consider to be close friends?
How do you classify it? Well, I'm sorry, I'm trying to be difficult. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, because it really comes down to who you consider to be close.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I would say like a good 3 to 4 people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How often, like, just in general, how often do you have contact with them? So whether it's
well, we are, they're in school and I work, and so we don't see each other. I think we see each other on the weekends mainly. So maybe we see each other in person at least once a week, but we like text and Snapchat and stuff like every day.
Okay. Yeah. And since the end of August, have you, these 3 or 4 people, these are people that you've considered to be close throughout that period of time? Okay. Has there been any time that that's changed? Either, there weren't as many people, or you felt like you weren't feeling as close to them? I know there are times that you felt like you weren't seeing them, but were you feeling as close to them during that time?
No, I still felt close to them, even though I was kind of not really wanting to spend time with them. But it was mainly because of me. It was because of how I was feeling, rather than how I felt about them.
Were you still in touch with them through social media, or how often do you think you were in touch with them?
Like maybe a little bit less during the times that I was feeling down. And I will say that when I was in that more kind of chipper mood, I was actually like reaching out to them a lot more. In fact, like my best friend was like, "You're like texting me like at all hours, like you need to stop." I mean, I wasn't like, my sleep was still fine, but I was like texting them a lot more. I was more upbeat.
Okay. Yeah. And when you were texting them less, how often do you think you were in contact with them, either through texting or Snapchat?
So I guess like on a typical day, like we may text like, I don't know, maybe a couple of times an hour in general. But I think when I was feeling down, like I would think I was maybe texting them like once every couple of hours.
So it's still daily, but just
Still daily,
a lot
but
less
less.
conversation.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And since the end of, I'm hesitating. I just want to kind of stop a minute, because we had talked about we would do just a shortened version of the psychosocial. So in case you guys are flipping a lot of pages, I'm going to go through, we're going to talk about employment and household, and that will be it. So that just the 4 sections, just in being conscious of time. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So you've been working since the end of August. Do you work full-time?
I do.
Okay. And has it been full-time since then?
Yes.
Okay. So full-time all months. And, as we were, I know there have been really specific times that you notice that down mood around or that higher mood around, but the worry seems to always kind of be there. So what I want to do is to look at, from the end of August till now, how things have been going at work. So when we were talking in September, there wasn't any down mood, no really high mood. During September, did you notice that worry would get in the way at work?
No, if anything, I feel like the fact that I worry a lot is really good for my job, because I want to do a good job. Like I don't want to make mistakes. I want to like,
Mhm.
I don't want customers to come back and complain that I like screwed up their car or like didn't repair something correctly. So if anything, it serves me well
Okay.
because of what I do.
And so in September, would you say that you were doing what was expected of you, or even doing even more than that, going above and beyond? And then in October, we know that there was this time where the worry was still there, but there was also that higher mood. Was
Yeah.
anything change at work? Any time that you were having any difficulties where these things were interfering?
Yeah, I don't. In October.
In
yeah.
October. So I know you had those couple of days on the weekend, but you were working.
I mean, I think I was, just really busy. I got my work done. I think the stuff I didn't really completely finish were the extra tasks that I kind of took on. But they didn't I didn't get into trouble. Like, yeah.
Did it feel harder for you to sort of focus on what the things that you needed to be doing during those couple of days? Because I know you took on extra.
Yeah.
And so I just want to kind of get a sense of where you felt like, were
I
you
think
having trouble?
I don't think I was having, I think I finished everything at it was a good level.
Okay.
I guess. They were like unfinished projects is I think a better way of.
Still getting done what was expected of you?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was the extra stuff that.
And then in November, I know the down mood kind of
Yeah.
started. Was that getting in the way at work? Was it making it harder for you to do what you needed to do?
I would say so. I mean, I think it, because I was like, I was kind of like unmotivated at work, so not really, and I was still doing it, but I was having to push myself, I would say.
Yeah.
But no one, I think everything was getting done at a fine level.
Yeah. But it was enough so you noticed it.
I noticed it because I'm usually like I like what I do, and I just noticed it. I was having to kind of like, just like I said, push myself to kind of still do it at a level that I was happy with, and because I didn't want to get into trouble or whatever.
And on days that it was feeling that way, like how often did you notice it? You were having, some trouble where you were noticing you had to push yourself.
I think a couple of times a week, I would say. Yeah, like not enough to cause like issues or get written up or get talked to.
Okay.
Or anything.
And how about in December? How was work going in December?
It was about the same.
Okay.
It was about the same. I think it was
And then the mood worsened in January?
Yeah, that's when I called into work a couple of times on different weeks, and I think I maybe did like once a week, 3 times or something. I called in a couple of times, and I was kind of slower, so I'm sure I was kind of like working slower at work. Because I was also very tired too. Yeah, and
did you find that were there things not getting done? Were you having trouble getting everything done?
Well,
or
luckily, the immediate stuff was getting done. Like, all the repairs I had to get done, everything was kind of getting done and needing to get done. And then the stuff that could kind of be left for the next day, I was leaving for the next day, and that is unusual for me because I usually don't like to leave work undone.
Okay. And how about in February? Again, any difficulties at work where your worry or, was or some of that down mood that was still around in this past month? How have things been at work?
It's kind of gone back to what's usual for me. So, working at a good level, no one's talked to me or said any comments about my performance or anything.
Have you felt like at any time in this month where you found yourself having to kind of push yourself? That feeling of having to kind of push harder to get it done?
I think maybe at the period between like the past 2 weeks and like January where I was like, so maybe during that
kind of the beginning of the month
where I was still maybe a little bit down, it was kind of like, but it was getting better. Maybe at that point I was still maybe a little bit, moving a little bit more slowly at work, still kind of tired at work. But definitely nothing like that over the past 2 weeks. The past 2 weeks, work has been completely fine, kind of back to usual for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And sort of how many hours do you work on average each week?
I generally work like between 40 and 45.
What would be sort of, what's an average for you?
So I guess, let's say like 40.
Okay.
40. 45 isn't that typical, so like 40.
And if we look at how things have been going around the house in terms of your household
Yes.
responsibilities,
Sure.
sort of what, like, just in general, what are your responsibilities around the
Well,
house?
like making sure my room is like tidy,
Mhm.
doing laundry, taking out the trash, probably like feeding the dog, like when it's my turn. It's usually my turn on the weekends because I don't always work every weekend. But just kind of sharing responsibilities of the family.
Okay. And, again, looking from the end of August until now, as we're coming through into September, when that worry was still around,
Yeah.
does the worry get in the way at all?
It really doesn't. I think that the worry mainly just causes like my family and my friends to sometimes like I do everything because I worry.
Mhm.
But the worry generally doesn't like affect like work or anything. I think if anything, it kind of helps me kind of get something.
So in September, were you kind of doing what was expected of you, or do you feel like you would go even above and beyond
I
that?
think it was expected. It was expected of me.
And then in October, when you'd have that worry, and then there were a couple of days of that higher than usual mood, did either of those things get in the way of?
I wasn't getting in the way, just lots of like busy, pointless stuff. So like reorganizing, doing laundry, just that stuff. And like most things were getting done, but there were, I think, a couple of things that didn't get finished during those 2 days, but I was able to finish them like within that week.
Okay. And how about as we move into November, and there's the time of the higher mood and also the lower mood was coming around in November.
Yeah.
Were you having any trouble around the house when we get into that, like by that mid-November period of time?
Like when my mood was up, you mean?
Yep. Well, you have the higher mood, and then it went right into by
Yeah.
Thanksgiving you were in the lower mood. So
Yeah.
really, kind of what were things like around the
when I was
house?
in that more up mood, I was doing a lot more spending. It was just happening more often, I guess, is the best way to describe it. But when I was starting to feel down around Thanksgiving, like that's when like I wasn't doing as much around the house. My parents are starting to kind of like need to prompt me.
Mhm.
Remember to make your bed. It's your turn to take the trash out, which is really unusual. I'm usually really on top of that stuff.
When they prompted you, were you able to do it?
When it started around Thanksgiving, I would say most of it I was. In January, like it would take me a while or sometimes just not get done.
Okay. So November, December, if prompted, you would be able to get things
It
done.
might take me like a couple of hours, but it would get done. But it was in like after the new year when I started, I was like down a lot of the time. Like it would just maybe kind of be a couple of days before we get done. And I actually don't think I did laundry one week during that month.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So for sure, laundry wasn't getting done for about a week. Were there other things in that week that you weren't getting done?
I mean, it was just like, I don't think my bed, I don't think was made every day. I think my brother was nice and he went to the garbage out for me. And what else?
So there was sort of like this week period of time that.
Where I just really wasn't.
Okay. And how about this past month?
Maybe like in that period in the
Kind of in early February?
Early February, where it was like between like being down all the time and the past few weeks. Maybe I was still like needing some prompting like occasionally, but it was much better. It was kind of more towards usual for me.
Yep. Okay. Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. I'm so
welcome.
glad you were able to come in and do this. And we're done.
Excellent performance.
Thank you very much.
Happy word for the Kobe-like presentation.
Copyright presentation where I'm like partway through the psychosocial, I'm like, oh, let's just do one section of the psychosocial. Let's just do one and call it good.
Thank you guys. It was really helpful.
Well, we wanted to kind of get something onto the recording of kind of watching this process walk through, and that needing to kind of track the time period, constantly repeating the time period, so that we'll have that. Knowing that, at every site, when you guys have access to the recording, certainly you're also, if people are a part of your studies, they're going to be sitting in on interviews and doing all of that, but it kind of gives them something, just a base to start with. And then what I'll do is put together for the electronic packet, there will be, for this role play, I'll be able to kind of walk through and code. So I'm not sure in terms of the recording of what we want to talk about on the recording versus having somebody be able to code off of this. So I'm kind of looking, Mary Kay, I'm looking at you and Heather in terms of we can use some of this time to talk about specific PSRs, or we can use some of this time to just talk about questions or areas where you guys know you have trouble, not you have trouble, but participants have trouble in any particular parts, depending on if you would like to hold this recording without a conversation about what the answers are. Basically, if you want to be able to say to somebody, okay, actually, at the end, there's going to be a role play. I want you to code it and then show me your coding. This is sort of where I am with the recorded piece, and I don't know how to turn the recording off. They didn't give me those things. I'm not allowed to touch that button.
Okay. So now, what do you guys think?
No, I think it's fine either way. I mean, you can always I think it's nice to have the answers and talk about the answers. You can always not show it to, say like,
Yeah,
oh,
that's
stop
true.
this time.
Yeah. So sort of like when they get to this point in the recording, you can have them stop.
Yeah.
And now what we can do is have conversation to make sure we have consensus on how you would want this scored. Because then they'll have a grid, it'll get put onto a grid, so you'll have it as reference, but you can still have the person sort of stop at this point and we're good to go. Okay, that'll work. And that way you can use it how you want to. It'll be more useful to you. Okay, that works. That works.
Meanwhile, during the role play, I de-identified 2 narratives, and I just emailed them to Mary Kay, Rita, us here, and Mike. So one is an example where there's not a lot of bipolar disorder symptomatology, which will sometimes come up. But in this particular case, they had a lot of substance use, which also comes up. And then I gave another example where there was more reported bipolar disorder psychopathology and less other comorbidity going on, so you can kind of see both. So that's in your email, and then we'll put it in the electronic packet too.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so is there anything that stands out to folks before we start to look at coding where it's like, feeling like, okay, that would either never happen, or this is an area where we know we actually find our participants sort of struggling with any particular parts?
Claire, I thought you did a really nice job with always reorienting the time frame. Especially like when you started off, at the end of August or beginning of September when we last talked, and then simply jumped to October. Then you went back so that you could walk through like week by week what symptoms were present. So that was helpful. I think sometimes like we think, we assume that since she's talking about another period that was most significant, that nothing happened in those interim weeks.
Yeah, it is important to just touch base because it usually just takes a few seconds of just us, just to be sure. And granted, you're kind of gauging your participants' agreeability. Obviously, I had somebody very agreeable. And everyone's, you weren't depressed anymore. You're feeling okay. So, but it just helps to just kind of touch on it. Before you go.
We'll just have like a mini mantra and it just kind of rolls out. So since the beginning of October, blah, blah, blah. And every start of every disorder since the beginning of October 2017, blah, 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 whatever. And you just repeat it and it reorients them to the beginning of that.
Yeah, and I will say, I continually look down at the page where I did have written in front of me, August 28th, 2017.
Yes.
So I'm like, yep, we're not relying on memory. So that's, okay, that's helpful to know. That is good to know.
And you also did a good job, I think, of like assessing symptom severity, not just was a symptom present, but how many days a week, how much of the day, and then assessing impairment too.
That's some of what we talked a little bit about yesterday. We kind of used the diagnostic criteria for major depression as examples of how embedded in the criteria even is the persistence. It's most of the day, nearly every day. You know, those, whether the criteria written and or those types of pieces, that it requires that focus on what your criteria are, and particularly also your PSR scores. And for you guys in Kobe, your hypomania scale is really laid out with clear detail of if this, then that. You know, here's the breakdown of the different types of levels and combinations of persistence and number of symptoms that you may see, and which ones fit where on the scale. And, you know, you guys have been doing it for a while, so it kind of comes off the top of your head. But as people are starting, we want to make sure that they're hearing it, you know, asked in the questions, because all of that makes a difference with the scores.
You'll see that in the narrative examples. So under depression, you'll see depressive episode and then frequency and duration, anhedonia, frequency, duration. And so you just go down and you make sure that you have frequency and duration for each of the symptoms. And all of that needs to line up to give you your PSR-5. If you don't have that, then you're probably looking at a PSR-4 or 3. So that's just your checklist. You'll see that on the narrative.
Claire, I also noticed too, when you started the PSF, the psychosocial functioning, how you framed everything in terms of how the psychiatric symptoms affected their psychosocial functioning, not just overall how was their psychosocial functioning.
Right, because we want to cleanly rule out the non-psych reasons for impairment. You know, when we talked about the section a little bit yesterday, there can be a lot of reasons why somebody's not working. For instance, you know, if the company's downsizing, they're laid off, that's got nothing to do with their psychopathology. However, there are people who may have been laid off either as a result of the psychopathology, or they got laid off and then they're having trouble job interviewing. So they're continuing to be unemployed for like 2 different reasons. It's psychopathology and the fact that they lost the job in the first place, but now they're having trouble getting a new job. And so that comes into play. So the more the assessor can kind of keep it on, you know, that there are we want to know sort of what those reasons are, you know, what have these things interfered. It kind of minimizes the conversation for the fact that there are other reasons why they may not be working. But that's like even with school, knowing that she wasn't at school, she's like, no, I'm saving money. You know, just a quick double check. Do you think any of these things are also part of the reason? You know, yes, it's her opinion, because there isn't anything that we've talked about that makes me think it would be part of why. But so I want to know her thought as well. Just it kind of gives that one more opening. Because sometimes you guys know you get to that section and, you know, the person might be saying, oh yeah, I just don't have the money, when you know all of what you've been talking about shows that that some of the psychopathology is also playing in to why they may not be going. I actually have a couple questions in terms of coding, because I am going to be putting this onto a grid. And so when we look at the coding for the depressive symptoms, really what I'm going to end up doing, I'm going to be looking on the grid and finding the week of Thanksgiving for 2017, and that's going to be the onset of depressive symptoms, and any weeks prior to that are going to be 1s per Kobe protocol. So they're going to be running at 1s, and so it's going to bring me to, I believe if it's the week of Thanksgiving, that's going to be like week 13. Because Thanksgiving was a little early this year. There was like a whole full week of November after it when you look at it on the calendar. So we're going to have ones that lead up until that point. And then what would folks want to give for a PSR for the symptom cluster? I don't know if you took notes well enough. We didn't really say you had to, so it's okay if
Yes,
you didn't.
I do have some gaps in my notes, but it seems like she met full criteria for MDD, right? Depressed mood, decreased energy, loss of interest, decreased concentration. Was there sleep disturbance?
She does in January.
Okay.
Because she doesn't have her sleep disturbance, because she'd say, well, no more than usual, because what we know is that it's really, her sleep disturbance runs throughout because of her worry, the anxiety. Okay. And she denies that it changed at all. So we are not going to be able to put that under depression. So I think for the starting in Thanksgiving until we get to when it worsened in early January, she's actually going to run at a 4. Because she's right on that line. She's like 4 or 5 days a week. So we know that 5 days we want a solid 5. But 4 or 5, it's like, okay, we're going to be right on the line. But she had the depressed mood, the loss of interest, the loss of appetite, and fatigue. So she ends up with 4 symptoms. Yeah. So even though she's right on the line for her timing, we're still a symptom short anyway. So I'd put her out of 4 because she's got, it still has distress and she has some impairment that's going with that.
So the fatigue, loss of energy, loss of interest, decreased appetite. What about decreased concentration? Didn't she endorse that too?
She did in January.
Okay.
January.
Okay.
Yep. So in January, she increases to daily, most of the time, every day. She's got the deep depressed mood, loss of interest, her low appetite with some possible weight loss. She's got psychomotor retardation, low energy, and the difficulty concentrating. She talked about trouble with when she's watching Netflix and a little bit of concentration problems at work. And again, was interfering with time with friends, with work and house. Definitely marked distress at that point. So we would bump her up in that first week in January, which is like around week 19. It's going to be 19 on the grid. We're going to bump her from a 4 to a 5 and let that 5 run until like week 22, because she gives then presents a scenario from that late January, beginning of February time. Things begin to get better, but she's not kind of sure how. Okay. So what we know is for sure the past 2 weeks, she's saying nothing. We did a quick run through the symptom list, no symptoms. So I'm going to code weeks 26 and 25 on the grid as 1s. And that leaves me only like 2 weeks in there that I'm not sure how this faded away, but it just sort of gradually went away in about a 2-week window. So for me, I show like a 4 and a 3. Yeah. Sometimes somebody might say, well, I'm going to do a 3 and a 2. Personally, your 2 is almost the same as a 1. Like it's not that helpful. I'd rather see like you're coming down into your partial remission, your movement through that, than see a grid. But, if I were editing it, I don't know if you could really call it wrong, but it's better to see a 4 and a 3 and just to kind of see that taper.
The change in symptoms.
To see that there's this decline in symptoms, but we know for sure the last 2 weeks are symptom free. So it's going to run, so PSR 1s weeks 1 through 12, 13 through around 18, we're going to get a PSR 4. We'll jump to a PSR 5. It's going to be on the grid for about 4 weeks. And then we're going to go 4, 3, 1, 1. That's how your grid's going to end up looking. Now, under hypomania, this is going to be absolutely full Kobe question. I'm deferring to Kobe on the coding of the hypomania symptoms. So her first episode, she's picking, she picked like a mid-October somewhere-ish. Mm-hmm. So for me, I just went with the week that the 15th falls into, which is actually the 7th week. It starts October 9th, so the 15th is kind of in there. So here's what I have a question for Kobe. How do you want this presentation of symptoms coded? So we've got this elevated mood. It's 2 days. It's a solid 2 days. We've got a pressure to keep talking, that talking at people. And we've got, to me, it sounds like she meets with the increase in goal-directed activity because she's got a
Worked a lot more hours, it sounds like, and
yeah, like things are getting done, but not everything. Like not everything's going great, but not everything's falling apart with it. But definitely like long hours. Instead of 4 hours, she's working 12 plus doing kind of these projects around the house, this folding of laundry and kind of doing things, doing stuff.
and she noticed the change, but other people didn't.
Right. Right. So
So when Claire and I talked about it, I thought a 3 is how I would code it.
What did you say, a 3?
I would code it as 3. If only because of the number of symptoms but I'm not sure. I think, so we were between a 2 and a 3. I feel like I would just feel more comfortable coding it at 3 if someone was endorsing that to me. But, I mean, it would certainly be something I would discuss with the other people on my team. So what do you guys?
Honestly, a 3 would be the highest I would ever code.
Yeah.
I guess the only, and I could see it too, just because I think overall the symptoms aren't that intense. You know what I mean? But I know it doesn't really get into detail though in our example, but like.
Yeah.
Because the 2 days falls into that moderate subthreshold duration under the duration criteria. But
2 days out of a week. But I guess then I come back to the other thing. 2 isn't much different than a 1.
Yeah.
So if you had a 3, even for 1 week, it would look like minimal subthreshold symptoms. So there, it would like, you know,
Yeah.
there would be some, you'd register that you had some hypomanic symptoms.
are people going to struggle with whether or not this is considered a change in functioning? Like she noticed it, but nobody else seemed to notice it. But as the assessor, you're hearing what would be a change, like you're, you know, so whether nobody said anything to her, like that's where I'm like, where would you guys land in Kobe on, because that matters for your scoring too, of whether it's considered change in functioning or no change in functioning. Under, because you've only got 2 symptoms, 2 associated symptoms. So you would have to have some change in functioning to be that subthreshold, kind of that moderate intensity.
I'm not sure, did Heather email that table to you, the hypomania table?
Yesterday, I emailed it to Rita.
So it's like a table that I guess Matt put together because I'm visual, and so I guess using that table just kind of based on how it is, it's like 2 symptoms minus impairment, which is kind of essentially what it just seems like a 3. I understand that 3 is kind of a higher end, but like I would just feel more comfortable scoring it a 3 rather than a 2, because it was around like 2 days but.
Yeah, and Mary Kay, you made a good point that if it's a 2, you're lining it closer with the PSR 1. Like it's almost just like something is kind of barely there, right? If you're at a 2 level when you start looking at this thing in analysis.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's good. It's a good example. Like as Cynthia was talking, I'm writing my notes and I'm like, oh, this is going to be so, I'm going to defer to Kobe. Like, what do you guys want to do?
Well, it's good that we're having this discussion, though, because I imagine it's training. Like, it would be good that they are kind of like wondering, is this between a 2 and a 3? Because so often we're kind of having that discussion. You know, I just tend to be more conservative, and I would just personally score it a 3, but I can see why people might think that's going to do.
I think the fact that in analysis, 1 and 2 are considered not present, 3 and 4 sub-threshold, 5, 6 threshold. So, like, I wanted this to register as something. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about a PSR3, no matter which 6-point scale you're using, it's a wide category. A 3 is actually a pretty wide category on a 6-point scale. There's a lot of different scenarios, and you get your people that sort of just cross in to the 3, and those that are like on their way up to a 4, that are sitting like really with some significant symptoms sitting there. So, you know, so maybe what we want to do then is to go ahead with the 3, code this, you know, there's going to be a 3 in that week, mid-October, because this is somebody who sort of just crosses in. We're going to just let this one cross into a 3.
We sometimes
A mild
say that
3.
PSR3 is kind of like a grab bag. There's a wide variety of what could be in there. And again, sometimes you're just shy of the 4, sometimes you're closer to the 2, but there's a pretty wide range.
Yep, so this will be a good one for you guys to have as a recorded one, because it'll, particularly for Kobe, it will allow that discussion to happen, you know, when you have some new staff. The other thing is we're going to come into, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say November. The next episode, so what we're going to have on the grid is weeks 1 through 6 are going to be PSR 1s. We're going to have a PSR 3 in week 7, which shows like the middle of October. We're going to drop back to 1s, and then we're going to have a week that the symptoms come back, and we need that week to be the week before the depressive symptoms start. So we're going to have that week be week 12, because we decided that the PSR4 on the depressive symptom line is week 13. That's the week Thanksgiving falls in. So the week before that is when the next period of elated mood happens. And now we've got, not, the mood is there not daily, but most days. And for sure we have a decreased need for sleep, still the more talkative than usual, still involved in increase in goal-directed activities. Would people give or not give the symptom of inflated self-esteem?
I didn't hear, what did she endorse?
The phrasing, the notes that I wrote down about that was, didn't feel better than others, felt really positive about herself, but wouldn't say she was feeling better than other people. In terms of when asking about, you know, feeling like you could just do anything, or it wasn't, her response was, well, I didn't feel like I was like better than other people, but I was feeling like I was feeling good about myself.
So again, I see that as just like, that's like a mild, like it's not really, she's definitely not grandiose. I don't know,
Yep.
you know, it's like a mild increase in her, like it's almost like a half a symptom, I guess, you know what I mean?
There have been times when we wanted to code 0.5. We're like, we wish we had a 0.5.
Yeah, I don't think I counted.
Okay, so we've got her elevated mood plus 1, the sleep, the pressure to keep talking, and the increase in goal directed. So we've got 3. Elated plus 3. Yep. So elated.
What did she say about her elated mood?
That it was there not daily, but most days of the week.
And what was it like?
I don't know.
No, I'm just curious. Some of the, like, her responses I couldn't hear, but
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
like it would want to make sure that she was like over the top happy, you know, not just in a better mood than usual, or do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'd want to know some intensity about that mood disturbance.
then when you have somebody listen to this recording, you're going to want to have that conversation, because I did not go in. I didn't
Okay.
really flush this out with her of really saying that to her. So is this better than like just a good mood that
like
you would
I
have?
tried to make this sound like hypomanic, kind of more like more upbeat, feeling more positive, feeling more good, rather than something a little bit more intense. Because I didn't want it to come across like this is on the line of being like manic. So I don't know. I'm sorry. If that
No,
wasn't
that's,
clear.
no, because I didn't ask you. I didn't take
Yeah.
you in that
I
direction.
see, yeah.
You know, and I think that's a really good point that we want to
Yeah.
make,
Sure. Yeah.
that we would want, you know, it's a good point to be able to have more conversation with somebody who's training off of this tape to say, you know, when you're assessing that mood, you want to always make sure you're asking the question of, so this kind of higher mood, this is better than a good mood. That this is taking, you know, where you feel even better than that. You know, an even high kind of hyper mood. Like something that's going to bring you to a different level.
And would it be appropriate to say on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being normal mood or 10 being, you know, 10 being the happiest you've ever been? I don't know if that helps to clarify things or makes it more confusing.
Because I think this is a good example, because we can say, you know, where I could have said to her, you know, because this is somebody who has times where she's neither depressed or elated or irritable. Like she has these periods, good chunks of time in between where the mood would return to what she considers her usual mood. So she's a good example of somebody you could say, you know, so, you know, when, you know, you've referred to sort of what you consider your usual mood to be, and this is even better than that. This is even higher than that. And, you know, I think with some folks, you can use the scale, the 1 to 10 scale. What's hard is that with a new rater, you don't want a new rater leaning on that. Because that's one of those things, like somebody who's like truly like brand new to research, when you get right out of school. We love them. Brand new research assistants are coming in the door. My only hesitation is when, if we offer them that option right up front, they'll tend to start to lean on it. And then we have no reliability if a subject says, oh, I'd give it a 7, and the next person says, oh, I give myself a 9. It's like, I don't know if they're different. Like versus, I want to know the rater's assessment. So that's my only hesitation. Like saying to you guys, you know, allowing you to say, go ahead, you know, if somebody's like trying to describe this, well, where would you put it on scale of 1 to 10 of like, where's your good mood and where's this mood? Absolutely. But a brand new rater, I just, that's my own bias, is I always hesitate because I don't want them sort of just saying, oh, I go with that every time now. It's like, nope, don't. So it's definitely a point that we want to discuss. It is definitely a discussion point when somebody's using the recording. That to make sure that that elated mood truly gets assessed. Because I can definitely sit here and think, yeah, I didn't. And I just sort of went in with this understanding of like, well, of course she's going to say it's elated mood. And I did not assess really what is that mood. So we absolutely want to get there, because this participant has the potential then of being full criteria for hypomania, right? If it's truly an elated mood, she has 3, 1, 2, 3.
Elated +3.
Elated +3.
But not severe impairment.
No, she has impairment. Noticeable impairment is
She had changed
noticeable.
behavior, but it's not like severe impairment.
Yep, and it's not daily. That you were clear that the mood wasn't there daily, so we're not going to go. But so this would be if we feel like the elated mood is enough, then it would be a 5. If we're not sure of the elated mood, I would cut it down to a 4. If I'm feeling like I'm not sure enough of full criteria. Now Not that that meets any particular rule other than,
Yeah. I guess I was
I don't know.
thinking, no, it's like I didn't obviously, and like I was the reporter, so I feel kind of like, oh, I wish I didn't endorse it a little bit more.
but see, I didn't ask
Yeah,
you.
because I think like when I was kind of describing the one in October, I think I did say something about how I kind of know myself and I know that what I'm experiencing is more than just, that's what I'm remembering I said, but maybe I'm just like imagining things too. But it would have been good for me, I think, to have, if I was an assessor, I think it would have been good for me as an assessor to have asked, can you please like describe that? Tell me what that was like for you.
Yep. And it's a good example of, again, of like you know, even when you're as the participant, if you're not asked, if you're not given the opportunity to share and nobody's asking you, then it doesn't come out in the conversation. So what do you think? Are you guys still on sound? Nope, we can't hear you. Oh, there you are.
How's that?
That's good. That's good.
Okay.
I'm like, wow, they got really, really quiet. Thinking
We
they're so-
wondered why you guys weren't answering our question.
Oh,
Yeah, we didn't hear you.
we're just talking, filling in the space.
No, yeah, I think she would meet because with the elated mood and she has at least 3 symptoms, definitely a change in her functioning and it was noticeable to other people. Not, you know, to the intense degree to be mania for sure. So yeah, I think there's enough symptoms there to rate it as a 5.
Okay, that's what I'll do then. I'm gonna put the 5 in week 12, and then she drops back down to 1s, at which she'll stay at the 1s for the rest of the time. That's what we'll do. We'll have a 3 and a 5 reflected on the grid for the hypomania. Now the only other place she does endorse symptoms under GAD. And so what we tried to do is to portray a situation where she was full criteria at the time of the last interview, denies experiencing irritability. So we go ahead and get a clean assessment from this point going forward. And so at this point, we still have the worry, you know, we're still a lot of the time, so more days than not, she's got the on edge, feeling on edge, falling asleep. So she only has 2 of the symptoms required, 2 of the 3 required. But it does cause some impairment, some arguments, some disagreement with family and friends, and marked distress.
I'm glad I endorsed that.
Yes, definitely, and gets the marked distress, and definitely the worry is in about multiple realms in which she experiences the worry. So she is one then we'd want to see a PSR4, and we're going to drop it in all weeks because we're starting this from the beginning of the reporting interval going forward. So we're not going to carry, you know, there isn't a change point in this reporting interval because she doesn't remember being a 5 last time. So we're not touching that 5, but what we know is that going forward, this is how it's been the whole time. So she would actually be shown as a PSR4 in all of the weeks. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. All right. In terms of the alcohol,
That's a tricky one.
Yeah. Well, because this is an area where there's all sorts of COBE protocol. There's all sorts. So as I was looking at it, it's like, oh, you got to kind of sift through this a little bit. And so there's a couple questions I have based on COBE protocol. Because she goes out a couple times a week, 2 or 3 nights a week, for a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours, and has 5 or 6 beers. And so she definitely, and then she'll go out, you know, about every other weekend. She's out over a longer period of time, still the same amount. That she's pretty consistent in terms of how much and what she drinks. walking through just looking at the alcohol dependence symptoms, because we're still in DSM-4, was cleanly, you guys all in agreement cleanly that no symptoms were endorsed there?
Yeah, she didn't endorse any there.
Okay. So what we have is, we have a situation where she does report driving under the influence one time in early January.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my question in terms of COVID protocol, because what we know is that the criteria, it needs to be recurrent. It needs to happen more than once. So she doesn't really hit the criteria.
Mm-hmm.
But there's COVID protocol of situations in which whether or not you want to use a 2 on abuse. And the focus of the one I'm thinking of is one of the criteria had to do with one of the protocol decisions about where there's still significant use, even though they're denying symptoms. So for me, this is where I want to know sort of where the COVID study would lean in terms of her reported use. Because it was kind of funny, because I'm like, oh, this is sort of a situation that's like, you'd have to think, well, where does the study lean? What's been the process in COVID of sort of what your standard is for a significant amount? Because it always has to do with the particular study and sort of what your population tends to report. Is this considered a significant amount where you may want to say, you know what, we might put her as a 2 on that abuse line anyway? Or she's going to be a blank line because she doesn't have a history. There's nothing that tells us there's any history of this. So
My thought would be she warrants a 2. I don't know, what do you think? I mean,
Yeah, I can see, like, I wouldn't, because abuse is funny too, because you only need one symptom to meet. But yeah, if something only happens one time, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to give you a diagnosis. Like, I'd want to see it happening more often, causing more impairment.
but 18 beers a week, that's something to take notice of, right?
oh, that's good. I didn't total them up in my head. 18. Good grief.
I thought 2 to 3 nights a week, 5 to 6 beers.
Yeah.
That's a couple. But yeah, like 10 to 12.
Yeah.
And I guess though, like, I would kind of want to know, because I think this can kind of vary by person, because when you're assessing the dependence too, she wasn't endorsing a tolerance. So I was like, okay, is this someone who started out with kind of a high tolerance? I guess I want to know, like, how intoxicated is she getting? You know what I mean? But I don't know. I could see 2s, but then the thing with that, do we start 2s from the moment or the time when she drove buzzed in January, or the whole time? Because again, to the only symptom, it only occurred once. You know, but I guess she is drinking every weekend.
Right. So because it only occurred once, she doesn't really get that symptom, because the DSM says to get that criteria, it has to be recurrent.
Yeah.
So per DSM, she doesn't really hit at this point in time anyway. Now, whether or not come next follow-up, this is starting to become a pattern, but it does, you know, this is one that was done very purposefully to say, what do we want to do with this coding? Like, we really put this scenario together so that one is it helps you to make sure that your new graders are hearing the criteria of like, oh, that's only once. Because you guys all caught that of like, oh, it only happened once. So it's like, we want to make sure, because, you know, as somebody who doesn't have experience may be like, oh, there it is. It's like, no.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not thinking as much about that as if you said 2 to 3 nights a week, 5 to 6 beers each time, plus every other weekend, drinks for a longer period of time.
Yep.
But it's not getting in the way of their life at all. You know?
Yeah.
I guess for me personally, like, the thing that makes it stand out is the fact that she drove buzzed once. Like, if she was just saying, I drink a couple times a week, I go out socially, it's never
isn't that a lot of alcohol to consume?
Yeah, but it's about, I could be per person. Like, I don't know. I guess I want to, how much are you getting? Like, and what do you, I don't know.
Yeah, but see, you can, that's why I asked over, like, what period of time are you out? Because
Yeah.
I can't go with what her assessment is of how buzzed she gets. Because, you know, everybody has their own opinion. But, so 2 or 3 nights a week, this is an amount that's consumed in a 2 to 3 hour period of time.
And then
Like,
sometimes
that's-
it's like over several hours, right?
Right, versus like, I think for me, I'm not as concerned about the weekend where it's like you're out for a longer period of time. So you're stretching those beers over, you know, from 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. But so you kind of know that the